Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson, broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Just went up to Wyoming today, had a lovely steak. Beautiful place, Laramie, Wyoming. Good to be, good to live, good to do business. How's everyone doing? Today is December 30th. This is the last broadcast of the year for me because I'm going to enjoy my New Year's and maybe blow some stuff up in the American way. I grew up in Hawaii, for those of you who know my history. And actually in Hawaii, people light off lots and lots and lots of celebratory fireworks. It's a Hawaiian tradition, mostly Asian tradition too. And it's always fun to see those things. Anyway, kept it in the blood. And I know my family in Wyoming is definitely going to do that, probably in Gillette. So we'll see what happens. How's everybody doing today? Having a good night? I'm having a good night. Nice and relaxed. Having fun. You know, it's been a tough year for everyone. It really has been. It's been a long year. It's been a painful year. It's been brutal. People couldn't see their loved ones and families. People couldn't travel. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of businesses went out of business. A lot of people died, over 1 million of COVID. My own country, 330,000. It's been tough. And we look to the future, we say, 2021, we have an opportunity as a collective whole, make it better, make it a good time. A lot of good things could happen. A lot of new businesses could be started. We can change the way we treat each other, maybe be a little nicer, less cynical, more optimistic. What's bothered me more than anything else has been the utter lack of civility that has crept into society as a direct consequence of social media. People think it's okay to treat other people like shit because they don't happen to be face to face with those people. And that is extended to every dimension of our interactions now, from our news media to how we view others to gossip at work. And maybe in 2021, because we've all been cooped up for such a long period of time, that we can change things a little bit, be a little nicer to each other, a little friendlier to each other, and a little bit more civil with each other. And maybe we all can have a little bit of empathy. Who knows? I'd like to believe that the human race can do that. I'd like to believe that people are capable of treating each other with civility and niceness. Maybe I'm wrong. But at the end of the day, I lose nothing for believing that, and I lose nothing for being nice and having empathy. So that's what I'm going to do. Of course, we always have the New Year's resolutions. Lose a little weight, meditate a little bit more, be a bit healthier, eat healthier, these types of things. Treat the family a little better. Make sure that you buy dogs their treats on time, these types of things. And of course, I assume you guys all have resolutions of your own. And that's going to be fun. Cardano is going to have a good year next year. A lot of the software is shipping. A lot of things are going to be built. And the ecosystem is going to grow tremendously. It grew this year tremendously. We probably quadrupled in size and participation. And the network is now in the hands of the stake pool operators. It's a very dangerous, scary thing. It's like random people you've never met over the internet are just somehow going to be responsible for a $5 billion network. And it's basically what happened. And they pulled it off, and they pulled it off in a way better than we anticipated. In fact, some cases, they ran it better than we ever ran anything. And I'm proud of that. And next year, we'll see it again with the arrival of smart contracts and all the dApps that are going to be on the system and the growth of the governance system. Tam and I, we spend a huge amount of time these days talking about governance. We're thinking about global solutions networks, multi-stakeholder governance. We've been reading all these historical papers on where the internet came from and how the internet governs itself. We're thinking a lot about, how do we build Cardano in such a way where the things that made the internet successful on the governance side and the evolution side can somehow be inspiring equivalent things, analogous things in Cardano. Because if we win that fight, we win all the fights. And Cardano is not only here to stay, it'll surpass every other one of these cryptocurrencies because it has a model to sustain itself as it grows to millions to billions and not regress or lose or ossify, whereas our competitors do. So that's going to be the great challenge of 2021. We know how to do the hard technical stuff. We know how to write the code. We have the protocols. That's not the challenge. The challenge is the social dynamics, the governance side. And I really look forward to that. In fact, it looks like I'm going to write a book. And there's going to be a lot of work that goes into it, but it's going to be a book on blockchain governance. And you're all going to hold me accountable. So by this time next year, probably sooner, we're going to have a book on blockchain governance. And it's going to contain within it all the lessons I've learned, the organization has learned, and other people have learned about governance in general, why it's important, and what must be done for cryptocurrencies to be successful. And it won't be an academic book. It'll actually be a practical book in that the things we recommend will have been done or already are done in Cardano itself. So it'll be an explanation of how to do things the right way and a demonstration of how we did it. So it's going to be a very exciting project and something I'm going to enjoy. Long overdue. I've for 5 years been wanting to write it, and I finally found a great co-author, and now I'm in a position where I can, and I'll just keep writing. 2022, we'll do one on identity. In 2023, we'll do one on value, nature of money, monetary policy, and where crypto fits and all of that. Because after all, my company focuses on the transformation of value, identity, and governance. So let's write some foundational books, huh? All right. Let's get to your questions. And the dogs always bark. It can be 8:30 at night, and they find a way to bark at some point, because that's how a dog works. How about your JavaScript course? I absolutely do want to do that. I've read a lot of books, and I have seen a huge amount of good material, good pedagogy, and I'd only do the course if I think I could do something original, novel, and unique. So it's still in the plan, and we will see where we go with it. Charles, mass adoption. Okay. Let's see. Come on, guys. Give me some interesting questions. Shave and a haircut. Occasionally I cut my hair. Occasionally I shave my beard. I just don't care. You know, I used to have to shave all the time. Had a job, made me shave. Don't have to anymore. So I love my beard. What are your thoughts on Holochain, and what are its pros and cons compared to Cardano? I know very little of Holochain. I tried to know a little bit. I went to the Reddit, and the community treated me like dirt. And so I give a cryptocurrency one chance. If it's a small cap cryptocurrency, I come on in, I say, hey guys, I'd like to know more. If they're a friendly, open community, it's great. If they're a closed and hostile community, as they were to me, I just say, okay, it might be great, it might be gold, but I just don't have time for this. There are 3,000 cryptocurrencies on market. A lot of white papers, a lot of ideas. I have finite time. So sometimes I just have to lose great deals or great ideas because they're inaccessible. And that's a lesson to everybody, because many other people hold the exact same standards. Updated security video coming. Yes, my company has a partnership with Udemy, and we're a consumer of their enterprise Udemy line. And I am taking some InfoSec courses on Udemy just to polish up some things. And I've been talking to a lot of InfoSec experts, and those InfoSec experts have given me some advice on how to redo the video that I shot. Nothing wrong with it, but there are some perhaps suboptimal usability issues where it's a little hard to do all the things that I've recommended. And also there are some things we can do to enhance the security of the Linux side and other such things. And so I will definitely create an update to it. But the video is actually quite sound. I like it a lot, and it definitely is very secure. My favorite part of the video was this concept of creating a proper skeleton key, because that's never discussed. People are, oh, just encrypt and do this and do this. Yeah, but you're always going to have that back door to your systems. And if people can compromise your email and all these other things, you're in for a world of hurt. So creating a very secure skeleton key is a good way of ensuring that you have a good foundation of security, and then you kind of build on top of that. And that was the point of the video. And so we've received a lot of things like that. Okay. What programming language should my kids be studying? I would highly recommend Python or JavaScript, probably Python. Excuse me for a second, I got to share a link. But Python is a really cool programming language because it does everything that you would expect programming language to do. It's really easy to learn, and there's phenomenal pedagogy for that language. And by pedagogy, I mean is that there's lots of learning materials. It's really easy to use, really easy to play around with. Here we go. There we go. Really easy to use, really easy to play around with, and you can take tons of classes on it. There's free courses on Udemy, there's free courses on edX, there's free courses on Coursera, and you can learn all about data science and machine learning. You can learn all about algorithms and data structures and these types of things with Python. And it's a gateway drug. Once you've learned those things, you can directly apply that knowledge to any object-oriented programming language. So you can go and be C++ and Java and other enterprise-grade languages. So Python is definitely it. JavaScript is also fairly equivalent, and there's much more applied pedagogy there. But I'd say Python is really great because you have a hybrid of practical things like ML and data science, but then you also have a lot of really cool things that you can do in the theoretical side. In addition to that, there's a good extensions of Python into the hardware world, and you can use it for hardware programming. So you should definitely buy a Raspberry Pi in complement to Python and have a hardware curriculum and a software curriculum so they can understand how the hardware works and what are all those ones and zeros and what are gates and these types of things. In fact, if your children are particularly ambitious, there's a lovely curriculum that's free called From NAND, N-A-N-D, to Tetris from Ed Shockley, and it's a really great curriculum. Is the distinction between the Cardano computation layer and the Cardano settlement layer still relevant? Yes. In fact, the side chains that we're going to run are examples of what I call the computation layer. The difference is they're not ephemeral. They're actually permanently there. But yeah, that's exactly what we intended. You have a very stable, secure settlement system, which is the primary network with the stake pool operators. And you have this collection of side chains which do different things and have different computational models than the main chain. And we've mostly preserved that with the DevNet idea. Charles, how do you get out of tutorial hell? I know I have to build something, but what are some good ideas to build? My recommendation would be a web scraper. That's something really practical and applied, and it's going to keep breaking, and you're going to have a lot of little issues along the way. And by fixing those, you learn a huge amount. And you're going to learn how to interface with headless browsers. You're going to learn to interface with network protocols, use REST APIs. You're doing real programming stuff. And then you get a lot of raw data, and you're going to have to clean it up. So you have to parse it, you have to write regular expressions. You're doing a lot of text processing. And then as you get that foundation right, what you do is your curiosity takes over, and then you say, well, can I build a more advanced web scraper? Can I do more crazy things with that? And then eventually over time, you develop a huge amount of programming skills, which are portable to many other domains. Because eventually people say, well, I want you to write a Twitter bot or a Reddit bot. Well, the same thing that you did with the Reddit scraper, with the web scraper, will be directly applicable to that. And Python can do it. There's a great framework called Scrapy, and you can easily use that. You can store all of it in a database. You can learn about database programming, like put SQLite with it or something like that. So I'd start there as an applied project. And there's even a Udemy course on that. Was the creation of Justin finally successful? Not yet, but I think if there's money to be made, Justin's son will do it. So we'll see. It's one of those organic phenomena that self-grows. What happened to the round glasses? I still got them. This is my backup pair, and I just have them over there, and I bent them up a little bit, and I just haven't had time to fix them, so I'm wearing the other pair. What do you think of Elon Musk's satellites running quantum computers in space, since it's close to absolute zero out there? Yeah, no, I don't think that's a good idea, because the temperature is only one part of the operating environment, and you don't have the Earth's atmosphere to protect you from cosmic rays and radiation and other things that would definitely cause decoherence. So probably not a good idea to run quantum computers in space. I'm sure it'll happen at some point because they need to be there, but it's going to happen first in very tightly controlled environments where everything is as easy to measure and monitor as possible. Space is a super hostile environment, and no matter how good you are at engineering, the things you put into space decay pretty rapidly. Charles, do you like video games? I own a video game company. Charles, when will you visit Singapore or Malaysia? When the world reopens, then I'll start traveling again and definitely go to Singapore. Is the purple mask on your wall from the Shakespeare Mask Company in Ireland? Very perceptive, but no. But the person who made it actually was inspired from certain designs that came there. So you're close. I'll give you 0.75 points. Okay. Do you eat enough veggies? No. And I need to eat more. And I'm going to do that next year. Hi, Charles. Any simulation on how k equals 1,000 will affect small SPOs? Yes, there actually are. They were done by Colin Edwards. And before k hits that, we'll definitely include an episode to discuss it. But there's many episodes on the YouTube channel of IOHK that talk about the economic modeling that was done. And I'm sure if that code isn't already open sourced, we can release it publicly. You guys can take a look at it. Satoshi Nakamoto was the first to invent blockchain, but it was Charles Hoskinson who defined it. It was Aggelos Kiasis, Juan Garay, and Nico Leonardis who defined it. The GKL model was the very first formal treatment of what is a blockchain and what makes it secure. And the GKL model is the basis upon which we've written all of our security proofs for Ouroboros. So not quite accurate, and I won't take credit for the work that they did. It was great work. Okay. When is the first African contract going live? How many users will it bring? We will discuss all of that in the Africa special episode whenever we hold it. So when we announce it, you should definitely come. It's going to be a very special African special. Anyone ever told you sound like Steve Jobs? First time I've ever heard it. Any updates on the cool game sound idea of dynamically changing music? I'm working on a few ideas myself. Yeah, for those of you who aren't aware, my game Legends of Valor, one of the things that I've been thinking about was the idea of dynamically generated, algorithmically generated music. So one of the problems with video games is that the soundtrack, no matter how much money you spend on it, usually the duration of the soundtrack is much smaller than the actual playtime. So maybe you have 8 hours of sound, 100 hours of playtime. It's pigeonhole principle. You're going to have something repeat itself. And so the sound effects and soundtracks, they tend to get stale after a little while. And then, it gets annoying if it's way, way, way too long. So the point of algorithmically generated or dynamic music is the concept that events in the game world will automatically generate unique music to those events. So instead of having an 8-hour fixed soundtrack, for example, you have an unlimited soundtrack, which will always be new, distinct, and different. The challenge is to make the music aesthetically appealing. If machines could write beautiful music, we probably wouldn't have Katy Perry and pop stars and these people. They'd just be completely replaced by AI-driven stars. In fact, we see that happening in certain places, like Japan. There's a holographic music artist. It's not real. It's like an anime character that is wildly successful. So the tech for algorithmically generated music is indeed there. And my video game Legends of Valor that we're working on, one of the things that we're exploring is can we come up with a really elegant way of doing algorithmically generated music and using that to complement the existing soundtrack of the game. Now, my wish list would be to get Max Richter and Ramin Djawadi to work together to create the core soundtrack of the game. Ramin Djawadi did Game of Thrones and Westworld and all these other things. He's a great music artist, and he also does soundtracks for games. And Max Richter is a very, very talented composer as well. And so I think their styles would work very, very well for what we wanted to do with Legends of Valor. But you still run into that core problem of, that will be finite, playtime could be not. So to blend those two together and use the soundtrack as inspiration for the boundaries of what the algorithmically generated music could do is a really interesting topic. Now, there are programmatic frameworks to generate computer music. My favorite is Euterpe. It actually comes from the Haskell world, the Haskell School of Music. It was a Yale project, and a guy who came up with it recently died of cancer, but his graduate students have carried on the project, and it still is going on. And you can use Euterpe to build pretty much anything, and you can do a lot of really experimental machine-generated music with it. It's very bespoke. Probably in the Python world and other worlds, there's larger, better frameworks, and whatever language we're using for the game, of course, we'd use a framework there, likely JavaScript. But there are certainly adherents who think about this and work on this, and it's something that really does interest me. And I think we could do something really cool with it. Just make sure the combat system is similar to that from the video game Shadow of War. I think it's the best combat system for an RPG. It's an interesting question. Warhammer has certainly done some interesting things in the combat systems. There are a lot of game systems like Pathfinder, Monty Cook's Arcana Evolve, the GURPS system from Steve Jackson, that could potentially be ported in an interesting way. Do you want to do a real-time combat system or a turn-based combat system, or allow switching between the two like Pillars of Eternity did, or even as early as New World Computing with the Might Magic series? So that's one dimension. And then the other thing is, do you want a combat system where you engage, but the actions are taken to chance, augmented by skills, or engage and your effectiveness is connected to your actual actions as a player? So, for example, a lot of real-time shooting games, like first-person shooters, you have to aim the gun to hit them, okay? Whereas a lot of turn-based strategy games, you click to attack. It's a dice roll augmented by a skill or level or other scenarios. So when you build a combat system, you have to really make those decisions of how visceral do you want it to be. So the other thing is the interfaces. Is it going to be a mouse and keyboard or a controller? So are you going to go cross-platform? And also, are you going to go mobile? Okay, so those three dimensions have mobile cross-platform from mouse and keyboard to the handsets. to also VR have a huge amount to do with how you design your combat system. The other thing is how much influence does leveling and character progression have over combat? So what ends up happening in a lot of games, especially RPGs, where your characters become exceedingly powerful, if you're not going to get rid of random encounters, then what you do is you introduce a quick combat system, because it becomes so tedious and trivial to fight battles that players just don't want to fight them. Even games like Heroes of Might and Magic introduced a quick combat system, I believe, in starting with Heroes of Might and Magic 3. So it definitely something to think about, and I haven't really decided, because that's well deeper into the game mechanics part. We're still in the ideation of game world and capabilities and game system, these types of things, and narrative. Every single thing you do in a video game has to be connected to the story you want to tell and the emotions you want to elicit. So you can't just create a game and say, okay, now let's figure out a story. And that's what EA does. And that's why they're terrible at what they do, and it's a horrible company. Instead, when you create a game, you have to say, what do I want the player to feel? Like, for example, with Red Dead Redemption 2, your character gets tuberculosis. Spoiler alert. And what's so crazy, and when you play that game, is that you build all this wealth and power and progression. Your character grows up, and you have all these things, and you keep progressing. But then you get tuberculosis and you start dying. You stop caring about the wealth and the clothing and these other things. You just want to cure your tuberculosis, and you feel this amazing empathy for the character. And contrary to what normally happens in these narratives, your character actually dies in the game. And the game continues after your character, which is an extraordinary thing. So that story you want to tell is far, 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 far more relevant to what ends up making the game enduring than, well, did this combat system follow Shadow of War or Warhammer or this or that or whatever it happens to be. Then you often think of other mechanics like the magic system and the stealth mechanics inside the game, and also what is the role of NPCs in combat and how do they influence combat as well. And then you have to think a lot about the constraints of the game world itself. So Legends of Valor takes place in a town called Middledwarf. And the city actually, under the lore, but it was never explored actually in the game, is shut down because of a quarantine, meaning you can't leave the city. So it's urban or underground, but urban and underground, so tight, narrow, okay? You play games like Skyrim, a huge component of the game is outdoors. You're in these vast vistas. You could be up on the mountain and shoot an arrow all the way down and kill something. You can't do that in Legends of Valor in the way it was originally designed, constrained to the game world of Middledwarf. The other thing, can you fly? Can you have a vertical component to things? These types of things. So all of those factors play into the combat system, and they should support the narrative you're trying to tell and the story you're trying to tell about that particular character. And you should make people feel the way you want them to feel. The combat system should augment that. That's why, for example, Warhammer is so visceral. It's a horrible world, 40K. You have chaos and space marines, and like everything wants to kill you. And everybody's crazy. Everybody's a fanatic. Life is cheap. And you have genetically engineered super soldiers going around chainsawing people to death. So that's very fast-paced. It's very brutal. And everything emphasizes the fungibility of people, the replaceability of people, and so forth. Other games, for example, like God of War, we were playing Kratos, you're special and unique, and you're killing other special and unique mythological things. There aren't 12 of them. There's one of them, okay? And that fungibility eviscerates a bit. So the combat system has to be very different from Warhammer Inquisitor to God of War, for example. So that is the driving factor, and everything feeds into this. Oregon Trail, Charles, Oregon Trail, another lovely game from the late 80s, early 90s. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but was one of the first really popular computer games. Super frustrating because you could never win it. And there was even a parody of Oregon Trail with American Dad, with Roger. Is Q Adidas related to the Wolfram partnership? No. It's going to be an in-house project, and we're going to rename it Hilbert. We just haven't had the time. I worked on one of the God of War games. So you know what I'm talking about then. Very visceral, fast pace. Now, there's a difference between God of War 4 and God of War 1 through 3, by the way. 4 was a whole different animal, and they had to redo everything because you have this companion, the boy, traveling with you. It turns out to be Loki. Let's see here. Let's read this C code. So you're returning BS to the terminal. Echometry. I will definitely look them up. Jay, I own a video game company, and it's a big part of my life. I care about it because I care about telling stories and narrative. So yeah, ask me about video games because it's something I do. It's part of what I am. It makes me better. Greetings from Bhutan, the happiest country on earth. Even has a ministry of happiness. Do you consider ETC your child? What do you expect for the project? I do not consider ETC my child, and I have no expectations of the project. We have put down on the table a path forward, and the ETC community is independent, and they are more than capable of figuring out things for themselves, and the community is going to decide in Q1 if that path makes sense for them. And if it does, we'll do it together. If it doesn't, well, then they're just going to have to figure out how to survive and go in a different direction. It's been a long time, many years, and not a lot of progress, not a lot to show for it. So it's very clear, regardless of what they decide, they can't keep doing the same things and expect to maintain competitive when everything in the industry is moving. Nothing is static. Hook up with Blizzard before EOS. I don't know, man. After Diablo 3, I was deeply hurt. Don't even get me started with that game. Everything was done wrong. Everything. You know, they had a beautiful premise. They had a beautiful game world to work with. Diablo 2 set things up so beautifully for them. And they just lost everything that made it great. And they turned it into a fucking cartoon. And then they say, boy, the fans really hated this. So let's follow it up with a cell phone game. And they literally had a guy come out and ask him while they were on stage presenting it and saying, is this like a late April Days joke? You know, seriously? So no, I don't want to work with a company. They lost their way. Bill Roper's no longer there. Blizzard North is gone. They've become a soulless corporate entity that no longer makes good video games. The last good game Blizzard made was StarCraft II: Wings of Liberty. Loved it. Heart of the Swarm, Legacy of the Void, what the fuck? Come on, guys. I stopped at Diablo 2 and I never finished Diablo 3. You know, I got to get into this rant. Okay, so Diablo 3 had 4 acts, and there were some interesting foundations to that game. So they had this idea, okay, you know, Cain is raising this foster child. The foster child turns out to be the son of the warrior from the original Diablo and the witch Adria. And she purposely did this to basically use that child as a vessel to bring Diablo back. Okay, that's a good framework. Got some twists and turns. You get to kill Cain, character we love and is dramatic. Huzzah. The problem was the execution of all of the things and the fact that they didn't understand how to actually take that scaffolding and turn it into a good story. See, the thing that made Diablo special as a series was that the things that you played in the prior games became relevant in the next games, and they were integrated into the plot there. So there were three characters in the original game. There was the sorcerer, the rogue, and the warrior. The warrior was a prince and turned out to be the next Diablo, because after he killed Diablo, he put the soul stone on his head, and it slowly transformed him into Diablo. And that's the villain of Diablo 2. The sorcerer, he went to Lutgolin and found the sanctuary and got corrupted by it, and you end up actually killing him. And the rogue became Bloodraven, the rogue that you have to slay in the first act of Diablo. What's the moral of the story is that the things you did corrupted or tainted or caused problems, and that continues evil. Great. So you have 5 characters, 5 in Diablo 2. You have the Amazon, the sorceress, the necromancer, the barbarian, and the paladin. Okay, so none of them made an appearance in Diablo 3. Just like totally forgot about that trend that they had continued. And they could have made phenomenal appearances. And so, every time I get really pissed off about something, I sketch out a plot. Like the season 8 of Game of Thrones, I literally rewrote both season 7 and season 8. I was so angry by what D&D did, Dan and Dave did with that show. I literally rewrote it because it was therapy, because I'd followed that show for a damn near decade. I loved it. I was so excited about it. And it was so horrible and soul destroying. I said, guys, you're evil people. Fuck you. If you want a great laugh, you should type in Game of Thrones season 8 film critic and just see what they do there and how they presented it. It was just horrible. So anyway, with Diablo 3, I got very angry at the entire game world. And so I said, all right, let's see if I could do better. Could I actually write a better plot than what they wrote using a similar skeleton? Okay. So I said, all right, well, first off, you have this Tyrael fallen from heaven thing. That's an interesting one. Let's keep that. Act 1, great. Let's build the act around Tyrael as they did, but then you have the paladin, and let's make him fucked up and looking for redemption and like somewhat corrupted and blind and so forth, and build a relationship between the paladin and Tyrael and have the paladin die at the end of the act. If you played the paladin character during Diablo 2, it's been really emotional to see that kind of thing happen. Okay, so Act 1 was actually pretty good. It was a good setup for the game, so mostly keep what they did there. Because remember, the first act is not just about telling the story, it's about introducing the game mechanics and teaching people how to play, and also introducing the atmosphere and the game world. So if you have loss and suffering and hopelessness and these types of things, that's the whole Diablo game world, and you really should do that for Sanctuary. So Act 1 was okay. Act 2 is where it went off the rails. First off, that whole plot was wrong. So Belial is supposed to be the god of lies and deception and these things. So why not do that? And this city is supposed to be, Caladan was supposed to be this incredible metropolis, and all this stuff is going on. There was no deception there. The minute you see the Emperor child, you're like, that's Belial. The minute you fucking see the kid, that's that. And what brings the character to that particular city? Have the sorceress character have taken residence there and have her be assassinated as the beginning point in Act 2. She's assassinated. You begin the investigation of who done it. And you introduce the great houses of the city and these types of things. And then you can play the intrigue between them. And you're trying to figure out who's Magda and the cultists, where is Belial. And what you do is you introduce a character that's the M. Night Shyamalan twisty twist, where basically that character you believe is beyond reproach and assists you the entire way. You kill Belial, huzzah, and then that turns out that it wasn't Belial, and that character turns on you, tries to kill you. That's what you do in those types of scenarios and situations, and you write a mystery story, right? Murder mystery is a good place to introduce an intrigue plot. It's a great place to introduce all the different relevant characters that exist there. Now, the thing that bothered me the most about Act 2 was the character of Zoltan Kuhl, the creator of the Black Soul Stone. So this guy is immortal, and he's so fucking evil and powerful. They literally had to cut him into pieces and hide him into pieces, and they still couldn't kill him after doing that. The minute you put him back together, he betrays you, and that's the last you ever hear or see of him. And it's like you just wasted one of the greatest character potentials in the entire series. The whole point of the Black Soul Stone is it's the MacGuffin that drives the plot of Diablo 3 and leads to the resurrection of Diablo. So keep the creator of that around. He's useful, and make him suspicious because it aids and abets to Adria betraying you and Leia turning into Diablo. Okay? And there's a great thing you can do because you can take an irredeemable evil character and you can redeem him over the arc of the game, thereby teaching Tyrael and the angels, these other people, that sanctuary is actually necessary because it has a choice. The demons are always evil, the angels are always good. That's the point. So they completely wasted that incredible character. Act 3, you have Osmodon, the last of the evils. All of the rest have been killed at this point. So he's king of hell. He's all of hell. The only one has ever done that. And he's the greatest general of hell. So smart and so great. And the whole act is you fighting your way into his volcano and killing him. That's an interesting starting point. But you know what you do is you play on the old past and say, what the hell would keep the barbarians going? Bring back the barbarian from Diablo 2. It was so great. He went to hell and killed Diablo himself. And you know what? Add the necromancer back in too. And have a great dynamic between the two. And they're the reason why the barbarians haven't failed. And it makes sense. You played those characters. You know they're really powerful. So yeah, they can stand up to the armies of hell, but even they are finite. And because they're there as a plot device, it gives you the ability to navigate through and sneak in and kill Osmodon. Great. Then Act 4, you go to heaven, and you have the whole betrayal situation. And then you have this great character, Imperius. And they just, like, every scene you see him, he gets his ass kicked. And this is one of those weird plot things where you're told the character is amazing, epic, and incredible. He literally forged his spear in the center of a star. And then at the end of all of it, he gets his ass kicked every single time you see him. What's the fucking point of that? It's crazy. It's like, this guy's the greatest Jedi ever. And every time you see him, he's falling down stairs or something like that. It's like what they did in The Last Jedi to Luke Skywalker. It's horrible. Okay, so don't do that. Don't do that. I understand why they did that, because they wanted to show how much more powerful the primeval was over Imperius and how he could break the deadlock. Okay, useful for Act 4, and your character goes through heaven and then eventually slays Diablo. That is a very, very, good structure, and there's a lot you can do there. But what they should have done is they shouldn't have stopped the game there. They should have said, hey, we have this Black Soul Stone. It can't stay in heaven. We have to destroy it. So you have to take it to hell, and you have to destroy it the same way the other Soul Stones were destroyed in the Hellforge. The problem is that something like that is going to be a beacon, and you basically have to go and protect it long enough, keep it long enough before you can destroy it. And who's the only person who can destroy it? The person who created it. So that's the point of the Zoltan Kulle arc line from Act 2 all the way to the final act, where you have this irredeemably evil character, and throughout the process of the game grows enough to actually be willing to destroy his greatest creation. And he's the only person who can, and you somehow have to trust him to actually go and do that. So you go down to hell, and then that's where you can have Imperius show up and help you out. And all the characters you've helped throughout the game, if you did good things throughout the game, they show up to help you. If you did bad things throughout the game, they don't. So you're on your own. It's a lot harder to win. And then the winning of the game is destroy the Soul Stone. And you have Zoltan Kulle sacrifice himself to do that. And Tyrael sees it. And then he understands why humans are redeemable and angels and demons aren't. There. That's a plot. It's a lot better than the old plot of Diablo. Yeah, it's a framework, spruce it up, good dialogue, twisty-turny stuff, good game mechanics, and so forth. Guys, they have billions of dollars and all these writers, and they just shit on a plate and handed it to people and said, here you go, we love this franchise. And that is the problem of Hollywood. This is the problem of video game developers. It ranges from Star Wars to Diablo to Star Trek. You have these beautiful things that are loved, and they grow beyond their creators. Star Wars is not George Lucas, okay? Star Trek is not Gene Roddenberry. People love these things. They learned Klingon. They didn't learn Klingon because of a deep affinity and relationship with Gene. They learned it because they love the world. They love these ideas, and they want to extend it themselves. A game studio, a video game studio, or a movie studio is a custodian of these things. They have a sacred duty to take into account the lore that has been created by the people who have consumed things in the past and make sure that that's sacred, honor it, and then add to it in ways that people haven't seen before, experienced before, and so forth. Deep Space Nine is a phenomenal example of this. Star Trek was always this optimistic world. Humans always did the good things. There was always the bad, and the humans were always trying to fight them. But we all know the world's more complicated than that. So DS9 introduces the Cardassians and the Bajorans and these other characters that were minor characters in Next Generation, and they turned it into like a Nazi occupation thing, and they had the Maquis, and, you know, should we involve ourselves? Should we not involve? And we had these really unique and nuanced characters like Garrick, the exiled spy, or Odo, the shapeshifter who's at war with himself and his culture, and the solids versus the fluids, and, you know, Cisco, who's like the emissary of the prophets but a Starfleet captain, and, you know, whom does he actually serve? So the nuances of that show were masterful for a show, absolutely masterful, and they extended the Star Trek lore in very productive ways and asked what if questions like, how strong are the principles of the Federation really? For example, the Federation allowed a subgroup, Section 31, to develop a bioweapon and use that bioweapon to kill all the founders. They knew about it and they let it happen because they knew it was necessary. Or in the case where the Federation was probably tacitly aware when the Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order were actually trying to kill all the founders. And they just kind of let them go do that, and Anabra and Tain go and do that. Why? Because it benefited them. That is a much more realistic government than the one that was presented by the Roddenberry Star Trek. And it extended Star Trek in such beautiful and productive ways. So what happens, though, is you have these idiots that come in, and they have no fucking clue about how to stay pure and honor and venerate the material, so they just throw it all away. J.J. Abrams, for example, 2009, he said, Star Trek is too complicated. So let's just rewrite everything. We're going to do a time story thing. We're going to do time travel thing. And just throw away 40 years of Star Trek history and start from a clean slate and do our own thing. And pew, 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 lens flare, lens flare, lens flare, pew, pew, pew. That's basically what he did. And then Star Trek Picard comes in and says, you get this beloved character, Jean-Luc Picard. We're going to make zero effort into understanding his psychology, his character, or staying true to that. He's a guy who's literally taken and assimilated by the Borg, recovered from that, and stayed true to who he was. But then we're just going to make up a bunch of stuff about where he goes and create some weird father-son, slightly homoerotic thing with Data and Picard. Who knows? Picard's really bothered by the death of Data, even though he wasn't when he thought Data was dead in the original Next Generation series. You know, and it was just tell these guys had never seen an episode of the Next Generation before, and it was deeply insulting. You know, and all the character development, all the lore, all the beliefs and expectations that people have of that world were violated in that series and Discovery. Same with Star Wars and the new trilogy. Contrast that to what Favreau did with Luke Skywalker. 2.5 minutes at the end of The Mandalorian were better and more emotional than the entire new trilogy, because people got to see what they expected, and they got to see it in a way that was unexpected. And it just touched people. We'd been waiting since the 1980s to see what Favreau put on screen. It was unbelievable. You thought it had to be a trick. It couldn't be. And then he takes the hood down, you see Luke Skywalker, a digitally de-aged one. Who the fuck cares if he looks like a plastic wax? Who cares? It's okay. You know, it was worth it. It was great. It was emotional. That is how you make great movies and great TV, and that's how you make great video games. You have to stay true to the lore of the world. You have to understand where you came from, what you can do, what you can't do, and what type of story you want to tell. There's a great YouTube channel. It's called Wisecrack. And Wisecrack talks about the philosophy of things, from Rick and Morty to The Matrix to anything, you know, in between. And these guys are trained philosophers. They have like PhDs in philosophy, brilliant people. And they go into deep depth and really, really get into the nuts and bolts of what are people trying to say and do. Great fiction, great shows, great narratives have that capacity to be analyzed, thought about, pondered again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Terrible fiction is so shallow you can't do it. It's not there. And the problem is most of the things that are being produced today are bereft of that. And as a consequence, they're not worth your time and they're entirely forgettable. And that's why we keep going back to the old stuff, because the old stuff is the only stuff that seems to have depth right now. And that makes me truly sad. By the way, this is absolutely relevant to Cardano marketing and other such things, because at the end of the day, storytelling is what makes Apple versus Hewlett-Packard. They both sell computers. They both know what they're doing. They both have tremendous engineering capacity and scientific capacity, and they both can build beautiful products if they want to. Why do people buy Apple over HP or Dell? Because there was a story that was told by a very charismatic founder. And that story was so compelling, it just ingrained itself into the bones of the founder and the company. And every single person who bought those products, they felt emotionally connected, perhaps more so, to those products, and evangelistic, and they defend them. Talk about marketing. You talk about what takes Cardano to the next level, what compels people to believe in it. That is the magic that actually makes great companies. To create an identity and a brand and a soul and a story behind who you are, where you want to go, and what you want to do. And if only people participate, we will get there together. So Steve Jobs was all about marrying the humanities and computing together, because computing was always viewed as a sterile academic engineering thing. We talk about these white boxes that are quite ugly, and we talk about the things inside of them. How much memory, how big of a hard drive, how much processing power, and it's fungible. You don't care if it's white box 1, white box 2, what brand, it's lowest cost for highest value. That was the game computing was playing. And then Jobs comes out and says, computing must be an experience that enables you to give experiences to others, make music, make videos, emotionally be connected to it, be creative. The things we build will help you be a better creator and in turn allow you to be a better person. And maybe you'll be a great person as a result. Maybe you'll be the next Picasso. Here's to the great ones. That was marketing. And that's what made them $1 trillion company. That's what made Apple so powerful. So if you're really good at thinking about narrative, you're really good about writing stories, you're really good about captivating people and enthralling people and capturing their imagination and their intention, those people will be with you forever. They will walk through hell, through razor blades and glass, if they have to get to the other side. And that's how you become great. That's how you create a movement. That's how you change things. You make people fall in love with where you want to go and what you want to do. The path ahead of us is not easy. We say Cardano to 1 billion people. That's the vision. And become the world financial operating system. How many regulatory battles? How many assassination attempts? How many setbacks and failed companies and scandals and attacking attempts and protocol failures and other such things do you think will be littered along the road to get there? There is nothing in human history that has ever scaled to 1 billion people that didn't involve a few graveyards along the way. Why would anybody be crazy enough to walk that road unless they truly believed that that outcome was something that they wanted to be part of their life story and be associated with? Great storytelling is what launches 1,000 ships at Troy. Great storytelling is what makes Apple a great company and makes cryptocurrencies so powerful. The same for Bitcoin. It was very hard in the early days. It was worthless. No one cared about it. Every single person you talked to about it thought you were crazy, a criminal, or stupid. But people persisted. They kept pushing and pushing until eventually it got to critical mass. And now you have all these people coming in and pretending like they were with us all along. No, 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 they were not. Okay, because when we contacted them, they didn't even bother to read the emails. And now they pretend like it's a revolution. The revolution was 10 years ago. And the adherents of that revolution had to endure so much pain to get us to where we're at today. And the dreams of Cardano are far bigger than the dreams of Bitcoin. So it's super important that we as a community, we know how to tell a good story, because that's what takes us to become the next Apple. And maybe I'm just talking to the wind, but it's okay. It's my show, and I can. Just don't look. Just don't look. Dun, 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 dun. The Simpsons, Treehouse of Horror, one of the greatest episodes. Killer advertisements. Any plans for Cardano to get into the insurance business? Actually, I was just talking to Nico, the CTO of Emergo. He's real excited about that as a potential idea, and I think he's definitely going to do something there. We don't have plans at the moment because it's not our core competency. And, we've talked to people like Swissery and others, and there's opportunity around pilots, but it's not our core competency. There's some more foundational things that we need to do, especially commercially critical infrastructure, stable coins, dexes, oracles, these types of things. And I think that's probably the most productive area I can spend my time and effort. That said, peer-to-peer lending, peer-to-peer insurance, banking on a blockchain, these types of things do need to exist if it's a financial operating system. And regulated, non-regulated actors will enter the space and do that. Charles, talk about Epstein. Epstein probably worked for the intelligence agencies. He was the compromise guy. His job was to get very successful rich people to sleep with underage girls, videotape it, and then use it to blackmail people for geopolitical reasons. It's no coincidence that he had such access for such a long period of time and enjoyed almost no scrutiny from the media or from criminal enforcement, law enforcement. So eventually he became inconvenient, as all assets who are inconvenient, he got cut loose. And of course, he knew too much, and so someone killed him. And we all knew that he was going to die, and we all joked about it. In fact, before he died, people were saying Epstein didn't kill himself. Then he killed himself. This is just how spycraft works and governments work. And usually they're buried in small. Epstein was so big because he was associated with such prominent people, and that's what happened, in my view. Of course, I don't have any special knowledge, but just my surface level knowledge of the case and the media's reaction, the fact that no investigative journalist has looked into it. Like, why is the New York Times not desperately tearing into this because it's such a scandal for so many people? It tells you there's a whole structure that we tripped over, as Eric Weinstein said. And we're not supposed to know about that pyramid that's buried under the sand. So we see just a little tip of it, and everybody's just trying to bury it again. So don't pay attention to that. Don't pay attention to that at all. It's an interesting thing. All the tapes will come out soon. So the very first thing that happened after Epstein got arrested and they found out that there were tapes, they raided his compound, and somebody had actually gotten there before the police arrived and taken all of the videotapes and all of the sound recordings. So that somebody almost certainly was an intelligence agency. Pick your favorite one. Is Polkadot a copy of Cardano's work? No. It's an original piece of work. It's original code. Gavin is a trained computer scientist from England. And as a trained computer scientist from England, he has more than enough capability to read the 91 papers we've written. And of course, there's some inspiration in the design of certain parts of Polkadot from the things that we've done. That said, it has its own design, has its own smart contract philosophy, and it has key differences in its design from how our system operates, which are much closer to what Ethereum is. Ours is kind of a spiritual successor of what Bitcoin could have accomplished had Satoshi known more and been more prominent in certain areas. So we're different systems from extended UTXO to accounts and these types of things. So Polkadot is definitely not a copy of the work. It's more of an inspiration. You kind of think of it this way, you know, Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, and then George R.R. Martin wrote Game of Thrones. Well, Martin is a huge fan of Tolkien. And a lot of the things in Game of Thrones were his view on how to build a world like that, but with his particular viewpoint on how a world like that should operate. So Tolkien was very optimistic, good triumphed over evil. And George R.R. Martin likes to present a slightly different view on how things should go. It really talks into the problems of ruling. You know, Tolkien's like Aragorn becomes king, and then there's hundreds of years of peace and happy ever after. You know, it's like, well, Baratheon becomes king. It's like, well, what happens the day after? You know, he becomes a bad guy. So that's kind of the Gavin Wood, Charles Hoskinson thing, right? We did some stuff and he did some stuff, and he clearly read our book and he's clearly doing his own thing. And there's inspiration there. And by the way, we get inspired. We read a lot of papers from the 1980s and 1990s and 2000s that provided a lot of good ideas, and some projects like NXT and so forth that provided a lot of good ideas to start with. And a lot of the job was correcting those ideas and improving those ideas. And you see a lot of that. There are cases when there is just clear copies, like Litecoin is a clear copy of Bitcoin with slight differences in the monetary policy and in the consensus algorithm, but it almost has identical code and a lot of the features. And they're very similar systems. Why people use Litecoin as a test net for Bitcoin in a certain respect, because if it works well there, it's a good indication it's going to work well with Bitcoin. Why is Tone Vase such a dumbass? He's not a dumbass. Tone Vase is an entertainer. You know, he sells products. He has a YouTube show. Tone makes money by getting clicks and views and controversy. So what are you going to do? Are you going to sit in a corner and be nice to everybody? Or are you going to throw fireballs at people and bombs at people until some of them land? Max Kaiser is a slightly larger Tone Vase. And whatever personal opinion they actually hold, they actually have their stage opinion. And they go and push that stage opinion and push it until somebody reacts. And when they react, it becomes a scandal. Scandal is clicks. Scandal is views. Scandal is money. Okay, so it's a standard operating thing. It's been going on for a long, long time. Rush Limbaugh, for example, he would say things all the time throughout his career as a radio jockey. It's the same for Howard Stern. That would create controversy. And they knew that would happen. And then everybody's like, I have to listen to the episode. I have to read. Keeps them in the media, keeps people talking about them. More audience, more sponsorships. More sponsorships, more money. More money, more happy. Are there massive egos in politics in crypto space behind the scenes? 100%, absolutely. The number one problem in the crypto space is it made a lot of people who are deep outsiders very rich. And they use the fact that they become very rich as justification for their very, very, very outsider way of doing things. And because they don't have to play by normal rules or have social graces, it amplifies the worst parts of themselves. You know, Abraham Lincoln used to say, if you want to know who a man really is, give him power. And the corollary of that today is give them money and then see what happens. And that's what happened to crypto. So it amplified the worst aspects of people. Now, it created some diversity of thought and gave people a voice to fund things and build things that wouldn't have been built ordinarily. But there are pros and cons to that. So there's enormous egos in crypto. There's enormous politics in crypto, and pettiness and just backstabbing and terrible things that are said and done just because of that effect. And, same thing happened in the IT revolution. Same thing happened in the hardware revolution, the internet revolution. The founders are not exactly the nicest of people. Any thoughts on reversing climate change? I think what's going to end up happening is fusion research is going to get really good. Nuclear is going to get really good. And we got a lot of alternative energy options. Tidal power, geothermal, especially fracked geothermal, super awesome. A lot of wind and solar is getting super cheap. Energy costs are going to go way, 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 way down. And eventually they're going to get low enough that, first off, we won't need fossil fuels anymore. We'll have battery-powered cars or the hydrogen economy, more likely than not battery-powered cars now, because that revolution's here and it's only going to get better. And the backbone will be carbon neutral. And so as a consequence, basically what we're going to do is build all these carbon capture devices. Carbon engineering is an example of a company that does this, where you literally suck the carbon dioxide out of the air, and then you can turn it into oil or gas or natural gas, or you can just sequester it. So what's going to end up happening is we'll just geoengineer and build all of these carbon capture devices that are powered by fusion and nuclear. They'll spend gigawatts, terawatts of power every day, basically sucking out massive quantities of carbon and reverse basically what was done over the last 200 years. That'll likely occur, in my view. It's the lowest cost way of doing things, and it's also the most practical solution because it requires zero behavior change on the global economy. It's like some places they can never get clean water. So what happens? People buy water filters to compensate. So similarly, we can never create a global consensus with the existing way that governments work on how to manage the carbon economy. And so, some rich nations with excess electricity, they'll just simply suck the carbon out of the air and do something useful. They'll probably make graphene. Are you afraid of Sophia? No, I know the creator of Sophia, Ben Gortzel. Good friend, good guy. Sends very long emails and takes time to reply to those. Brilliant, brilliant person, though. Not afraid at all. I'm not afraid of the future. I'm optimistic. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Is climate change entirely bad? The Earth is getting greener, called the Great Global Greening. Higher carbon dioxide has actually created a lot of growth in plants and more biomass that forms. And it's really, 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 really interesting that this is a dynamic system. And just because we are seeing something occur doesn't mean we know the entire story. And there might be an opposite reaction that occurs that compensates, like global greening is a natural sequestration. But the jury's still out on these things. And the problem is, the concern with climate change is that it will not impact wealthy nations. It'll devastate poor nations because they don't have the resources to geoengineer or deal with disruptions in crop production or other such things. That's at least what's being said. Super politicized issue because all of the solutions that are being proposed by the UN and the radical extremist environmentalists is the construction of a global government. People are super skeptical when something happens and your solution to that thing is create a one world government to regulate and manage it. I'm sorry, if you have the ability to control how much carbon any company in the world produces, you effectively control every business in the world. And if you do that, you're effectively a world government. So it's very skeptical, a lot of people. They're like, hang on a second here. And then they have a bad history of predictions. But, that's science. Science doesn't give you good predictions. What is your favorite cuisine? Italian. Yeah, we're seeing a convergence of this. Charles, can you tell me what your thoughts are on quantum computing and the effect that it has on the crypto world? This question comes up in every AMA. Quantum computing is the boogeyman of crypto. And they're like, oh, quantum computers will come and we're all going to die. And all cryptos will instantly be broken and nothing will ever work. Right now, here today, there are plenty of post-quantum algorithms we as an industry can adopt. They are suboptimal, but we can adopt to completely to inoculate ourselves from the threats of quantum computing. Quantum computing is not a threat on cryptography today. It's a threat in 2035. It's a threat in 2045. It's a threat in 2055. Why are governments taking it seriously today? Why are governments involved in this today? If you're China or America or Russia, you will archive internet traffic. So every time an encrypted email leaves a Department of Defense server, every time there's a VoIP call that's encrypted by a government official or some facility, or an encrypted piece of data is transmitted, it will be intercepted. This is the assumption, the security threat model that these security agencies have. Now, you can intercept encrypted data. You can't decrypt it. But if you have a quantum computer, you can. So here's what happens. You archive all encrypted traffic and you wait for technology to get better. And once it gets there, guess what happens? You can use your quantum computer MacGuffin to now decrypt all those secret communications that happened 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. And you say, but Charles, who cares? It was 10, 20, 30 years ago. How long has it taken to bring the F-22 Raptor to market? How long has it taken to bring the F-35 to market? How long does it take to build a new tank or a new helicopter? How long do you think these nation secrets have to be stored and kept secure before they're no longer relevant? There's a reason why the CIA declassifies things only after 50 years and FOIA forces their hand. Because that tradecraft and that knowledge is as relevant today as it was perhaps 10 or 20 years ago. So quantum computers are a huge threat in that respect, and that future adversary, by having the ability to look at the state of our communications today, can learn enough from that to infer what we're doing then, or at least know how to deal with our countermeasures then. So NIST wants to change the algorithms as quickly as they can because that archiving attack is quite problematic. We're starting to enter the zone where that's going to be a problem. Okay, for cryptocurrencies, it's not. These are social systems. You can't reverse hashes. You know, you're going to be in a position where we can reconstruct things and protect things. Okay, and we have plenty of post-quantum algorithms, and part of the Cardano 2025 agenda that we'll propose will include a quantum agenda, which will completely incubate the system with best available protocols. The only reason we didn't do it today was crypto was not good enough to do that with reasonable trade-offs. I don't want to go to market and say, I fear something in 2035, so I'm going to make myself 100 times slower and my signature is 100 times larger than all of my competitors and deal with this huge inefficiency that's been introduced to protect ourselves from a threat 15 years from now. We call that going out of business. But it's something we should get done by 2025. Now, a lot of cool things. Quantum teleportation is getting really good. Quantum cryptography is getting really good. And time crystals are here. How about that? Time crystals. Boxing match, Vitalik versus Charles. Come on, guys. Be realistic here. It's like Mike Tyson versus Floyd Mayweather. Good luck with that. Poor Floyd. Mm-hmm. What other contributions has the U.S. government made to early cryptography, modern cryptography? The field of cryptography would be in its infancy without the constant vigilance of the U.S. government in particular. The last 40 years, almost every major advance in some way is directly or indirectly connected to the U.S. government. Either they trained the scientists or incubated the scientists who did the research, they directly funded them, they inspired them or their colleagues, and a lot of things have been discovered. Also, the government's desire to break crypto has massively improved the ability to break systems, which has become a skill that is now ingrained into cryptography and information security. So just by having this adversary around inspires cryptographers to get very, very aggressive. For example, there's a great crypto group in Israel, and they specialize in a weird thing called private data exfiltration, where they specialize in removing data and cryptographic assets from air-gapped systems through very creative means. Trojans they introduce into memory can turn your RAM into a Wi-Fi transmitter, and even though your system is air-gapped, they can now use the RAM to connect to your computer, and at a byte rate of 500 bytes or something like that, they can gradually steal things in memory. They call it AirFi or RAMFi or something like that. Microphones that are very sophisticated can listen to your computer doing calculations, and just by changes in frequency of the processor, they're actually able to get your PGP key or things like that. Incredible work. The guy who does his name is Mordecai Gurion, and he's just a brilliant guy, and his students are really brilliant. That's inspired a lot by the IDF, and there's equivalent capabilities inspired by the NSA and the CIA here in America. So there's enormous contributions that they have, from the creation of public key crypto to weakening of the death standard to the Clipper chip, look up that one, to their attacks on people who want to evangelize cryptography, like Bruce Schneier, creating a whole new culture and ethos of how to open source things in certain ways. So both being a good actor and a bad actor, from good actor in the standard side to a bad actor in the adversarial side, they have massively improved the richness of that entire space and simply would not exist without them, much like the internet with DARPA. What the hell is a time crystal? I'm still trying to figure that one out myself. I am not smart enough to know. I know of them. I've read articles about them. I'm still having some trouble grasping the depth of that concept, but I know it's a big, important thing for quantum computers. It's like potentially could be the memory of them. They can turn your RAM into a radio. Yes, they can. Charles, what are your thoughts on clean meat? Lab-grown meat, interesting stuff. You still need biomaterials from existing animals, and those biomaterials are still difficult to harvest without harming the animals, or at least subjecting the animals to slightly less than ethical treatment. So we're not quite where we need to be yet, but lab-grown meat is an emerging field, as is vertical farming. There's a great company called, it'll come to me in a moment, they're based in California, and it's just a 2-acre farm. They've replicated the capacity of like a 600-700 acre farm. Plenty is the name of the company. And they use AI and robots to basically run the facility. And it uses 99% less water than a conventional farm, despite the fact they have a 300x improvement yield. So vertical farming combined with lab-grown meats is probably going to be a desirable thing for urban centers in 2050s, 2060s, and much more environmentally sustainable. Fourier transforms. I just happen to have this book on Fourier analysis. How about that? Just sitting randomly on my desk for some particular reason. Thank you, sir. Charles, are you still going to do updates in the AMAs after your contract ends? Yeah, There was no contractual obligation to do any of these things. I love you guys. Source of strength and inspiration. Of course, I'm going to talk to the community. You guys listen to me talk about rewriting the plot for Diablo 3 and what I wanted Zoltan Cool to become. Why would I ever leave an audience like that? Come on now. So yeah, of course I'm going to do AMAs. And the contract ends here in 2 days. And you know what's going to happen when we get up in January? We're still going to be working on Cardano for free for a while to get all the things done that need to get done. How about that? Because it's the right thing to do. You don't leave till the job's done, kids. Don't leave until the job is done. Do your job well. Have pride in what you do. Best Lord of the Rings trilogy movie. That's like saying, which kid do you love the most? I think the best battle they did was, Helm's Deep with the two towers. That was great. The Fellowship was incredible because it opened you up in the world. And then Return of the King, you had to watch, right? Because you had to see how it ends. And they ended it 19 times. Charles, have you ever solved a Rubik's Cube? Yes. And one day I'll get mantis shrimp so they can solve it for me. Best major to study, computer science. Best minor, music and art, so you can get laid. What is your deepest secret? Well, if I told you, it would no longer be my deepest secret, right? Why didn't you get a new contract? Because I need to do that with you guys. We're actually going to propose to the community through a voting process, Cardano 2025, along with a whole governing structure and many, many more entities than just the core three who started. And you, the community, will decide whether we should do that or do something else, because that's the only entity that can give a contract to go and work at Cardano. Even if I had some third party saying, here you go, do all this work, how would we get all the code we've written to be accepted? It's a decentralized ecosystem. So you need a government to do that. So let's build a government that looks like how the internet was built. And that's what we're working on right now. Why did Jeff Bezos build a multi-million-dollar clock inside a mountain? Is he up to something? Yeah, that clock is incredible. I studied horology. I used to build clocks and watches, and I still have a full horological set. And I collect clocks and watches. Jaeger LeCoultre Atmos is actually my favorite clock. And I love Vacheron Constantin. They built these beautiful skeleton watches. And actually, Jacques Dreux is my favorite automaton maker. So apparently, Jeff Bezos likes horology as well. And because he's just so fucking rich and he has nothing better to do, he's decided for some reason to build giant clocks. I don't know why, but he built one. You'll have to ask him. Brad Garlinghouse would never do a Q&A. Yeah, and he hired Ben Losky. How about that? And he paid himself $150 million for the privilege of it. I don't have a lot of patience or respect for certain people, especially people like Brad. There was just this fakeness about the management of XRP. We're like, we'll be a cryptocurrency because it's profitable, but we're not. We're a banker coin, but we're not because we're a cryptocurrency and we're equity financed. It's a weird chimera of our space, and I've never understood it. I never saw the value in it. And then every now and then you'd see something they created. You're like, oh, okay. These guys are actually a threat now. Codius, smart contracts in 2015. Holy moly, that's interesting. Okay, we got to be careful about that. And they're like, no, we're going to kill that. Can't allow DeFi to form in our space. We can't allow XRP to be the platform for issuing assets. We just can't do that. You could have been Ethereum, guys. You were there first. You had the engineers. You had the people. I mean, David Schwartz is a really smart guy. He was at the NSA before he was a proper computer scientist, and he knows what he's doing. He knows how to run engineers. He's a good chief scientist, CTO. He just let it all go. Why? I don't know. Why does anybody do anything? Face your community, have the balls to go talk to them on a regular basis, and let them, in a very transparent, open way, ask you questions and answer them, and let them know who you are. That's how a CEO should be. That's how they should act. Or maybe I'm just crazy. I don't know. Exactly. I talked to Stephen Thomas about that. I called him up. He was the CTO at the time. I said, Stephen, you got to tell me about this Codius thing. This is fucking crazy. This is great. I was really excited about it because actually it would have been useful for Cardano, for our computation layer. The stateful operators could run Codius nodes, right? And then they could run distributed smart contracts, and you have a massive throughput. So as you gain more stateful operators, you get more throughput on your smart contract. And then you just basically pick your trust pairings and you say, okay, it's a high assurance calculation, so I should have 7 of 9 run it and agree with that answer. I don't really care too much. 2 of 3. And the cost scales based upon that. Smart idea. And they could have done it, and it would have been beautiful. Did they? No. Crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Will Cardano work without internet access? Long-term goal of mine, something I'd like to get done by 2025, offline off-chain transactions. So for those of you who don't know, the idea would be that you have trusted hardware in a device like a phone or something you can plug into a phone or laptop or desktop computer, likely a phone though, because this is what you all have. You plug the device in. That device contains a private key. Now, trusted hardware, you can't just be like, oh, okay, transfer private key, have it move. Like, for example, YubiKeys. I did that YubiKey lecture. When you put your PGP key on your YubiKey, you can't take it out. There's no mechanism to do that. Okay, so it's just there. So the idea of an offline off-chain transaction would be you create 2 protocols. You create a transfer protocol that allows you to guarantee that you have moved a private key from one trusted hardware enclave to another trusted hardware enclave. And how you do that is you encrypt that payload with the public key of the other enclave, and you know that that's the other enclave, and you transfer it. Usually it's a signed public key and there's all these things involved. Once it's transferred and you have a confirmation that the transfer has happened, then the trusted hardware will execute a proof of secure erasure. Once that proof of secure erasure has been transmitted to the other device will hold on to that private key that's now in custody. Otherwise, it'll erase it. Now, proof of secure erasure means that you have a proof of destruction of the private key on the original device. Okay, all of this can be done offline over Bluetooth or another transfer medium. Why is this important? Well, if you can you get a proof of uniqueness that private key is unique, and a way of transferring it from one enclave to another enclave, and a guarantee that it's unique after the transfer is done, you have effectively created cash because it's completely offline, it's completely anonymous, and it's infinitely scalable because these are point-to-point transactions, and on the blockchain, you don't see them. But I have access to that money on that trusted hardware enclave. So you can now, without internet, just tapping phones to people and having them sit together for 30 seconds and maybe entering a password or something, you can do that. And you can't extract the key from the trusted hardware enclaves. That's the idea. So that's a protocol we'd love to build and create some hardware for it. And that was the purpose of the University of Wyoming relationship, was to explore that, because that gets me cash in Africa, especially if those private keys correspond to stable coins. Then those are denominations and they can be transferred. And now you have cell phone-based stable coin offline money that's totally anonymous and private, infinitely scalable. And it's within reach within 5 years. It's actually possible to do that. Hard connect if possible. Yep. USB to both phones, sync them through an app, click, 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 you're done. And most phones have trusted hardware enclaves. Samsung has Knox, for example. iPhones have trusted hardware. Your phones will end up in the developing world within 24 to 36 months because you upgrade. And what happens when you trade them in? They get shipped out to Africa. Is it safe with a Bluetooth connection? Yes, because the payloads are encrypted that are being transferred. So you do not rely on the secrecy of the transfer medium. What happens if someone steals your phone? That is the what happens if someone steals your wallet? You lose all your cash. So there's always that downside. Now, you could create a recovery situation where the money is locked and only you can recover it, and you have to get the device back. But that's a serious issue. If your phone is lost, you lose your money. Now, you could create a hardware subnet and have these trusted hardware devices act as consensus nodes and have the ability to rotate credentials or give you something and that's stored in secure storage. But you add so much complexity when you have that recovery mode. And that's the point of cache. You create cache, large amounts of it are problematic, small amounts of it have high velocity and they transfer hands all the time. So it makes sense to have digital cache, and when it gets too large, you exfiltrate it from that system and you store it in a more secure means, like on a ledger or Trezor or through some cloud solution. What's the most favorite sports car you have owned? I have a Lamborghini Huracan 2017 LP 610 Spider. Love it. Expensive as hell to fix. Are those Lamy pens? Very perceptive. Have a backup phone. That actually does not work in this case. Why? Because the keys are unique. They can only live on one device at a time. Just like your wallet, and the cache in your wallet is unique. You can't have a backup wallet with backup cache. That's different cache. My projects like Starlink network preempt the need for offline transfers. If they can't afford internet, how could they afford this trusted hardware enclave? I can make a trusted hardware enclave, like those Tangem cards would actually be sufficient. You can make them for like 50 cents or $1. Okay, so they're very cheap to make, and they can be subsidized through third-party actors, and that's for an external chip. These capabilities are already built into many modern phones. Samsung Galaxies, Apple phones, Google phones, LG phones, HTC phones, almost all modern phones have a trusted hardware enclave. It's part of the ARM standard called ARM Trust Zone. So those chips exist and that software exists, and it even exists in the laptops and desktops of the world through Intel SGX and AMD's trusted hardware enclave. So basically these things do exist. They're already distributed to billions of devices, and if you want to augment your devices, the cost of doing so is in the dollars or cents. It's not much larger. Starlink is a promising idea, but ubiquitous internet is something we're probably not going to have for a while. And even if we have it, it will be intermittent for many places in the developing world for the next 20 to 30 years. So pretty good to use a stopgap. Also, this solution is complementary to internet access because this solution allows offline private infinitely scalable peer-to-peer transactions to occur. So just because you have cash doesn't mean you don't need a bank account. And just because you have a bank account doesn't mean you don't need cash. They complement each other. We don't have a cash equivalent in the cryptocurrency space at the moment. What is your astrological sign? I am a Scorpio. Can't you just do it with your head? Yes, if Neuralink actually comes out. Heard of a person who got coronavirus after a vaccine. Is this a concern or just a hype article? You absolutely can get coronavirus after a vaccine. When you hear things like 96% effective, it means 4% of people who got the vaccine still got sick. Usually what ends up happening is that they get sick very soon after they've been inoculated, or they were sick prior to being vaccinated and they just develop symptoms later. Now, even if that's not the case, the illnesses tend to be less significant. For example, 100% of the Moderna Pfizer cases did not have serious illness in the vaccine groups. Even though they got infected, it was a mild infection. So the particular person who got the coronavirus after he was vaccinated was a nurse and got it 8 days after being vaccinated. You need to go through both shots to get full immunity. And even after one shot, you still have to wait a few weeks before immunity fully kicks in. Okay. So yeah, you're not invulnerable or immune, but the good news is it's like getting an injection of monoclonal antibodies. It probably is going to massively reduce the seriousness and duration of the disease. What about ivermectin? Great drug. They use it for parasites. I give it to my horses to prevent problems. There's a lot of evidence that ivermectin works. Strange that we don't talk about it. How do you avoid double spend on the peer-to-peer transaction? Basically, that's the proof of secure erasure. So after you've transferred the key, basically the enclave will automatically destroy its copy of the private key, and it can't do another transfer until that copy has been eradicated. And then the other enclave will not accept the private key until it receives a proof of secure erasure. Otherwise, it will actually destroy the key itself. So if there's an interrupted transfer and enough time has passed, then actually the safe thing to do is destroy the money, as opposed to allow two keys to exist. So you guarantee it through the proof of secure erasure, the uniqueness property. Thoughts on the mRNA vaccines in particular versus traditional? Great platform. They had the Moderna vaccine in 2 days after receiving the genetic sequence, and mRNA is the future. A lot of stuff they have to do to clean it up. The polyethylene glycol that they're using as the adjuvant and for the bilipid layer stuff in the vaccine is causing allergic reactions, much higher than a normal vaccine would have. Anaphylaxis, for example, occurs about 1 in a million for a normal vaccine. For Moderna Pfizer, it's about 1 in 50,000. So it's 20 times more likely. So that's probably going to have to change. It's supposedly an inert substance, but it's in mouthwashes and toothpastes and laxatives and other substances. And some people have developed intolerance to it, kind of like gluten intolerance. And when you inject it to someone, that causes an issue. So that's an example of being new. You don't have an optimal supporting infrastructure around the mRNA to make it viable. The ability to, in software, make a vaccine through a computer model is an extraordinary thing because you can keep up with the rate of evolution. Like, for example, you've heard of the UK strain, which is far more infectious, that some scientists believe. And you've heard of the South Africa strain that is not, it's the same level of infectiousness, but it seems to be more lethal. and there might not even be strains, they're variants. They haven't quite reached strain level yet. Let's say for the sake of the argument that the vaccines are less efficacious in their current form to these new variants, you would, through software, be able to custom tailor mRNA to basically correct that. And you could do that in 2 days or 3 days, and then you just adjust your supply chains. So the vaccines that you have coming out will contain some of the old immune response against one of the variants and the new immune response against other variants. You just simply could not do that with a normal vaccine supply chain. It takes years to do all this. Now you can do it all in software. So it's a miracle, an absolute miracle. The other thing I really like about the mRNA vaccines is they do not interact with your DNA, and they're very, very direct. It's basically an instruction that enters the cell, and that instruction will then make something, and that's something you make an immune response will be elicited from that. Look at the AstraZeneca vaccine that was just approved in the UK, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is likely to be approved in February. Those are recombinant viral vectors, and so they're adenoviruses. So these are monkey viruses that have been genetically engineered not to replicate, and they carry actual DNA in them. And that DNA enters your nucleus, interfaces with your DNA, creates the RNA, similar RNA to the RNA that's in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and that RNA will then make the proteins and those spikes, and then your body will create an immune response, and huzzah, hallelujah. I think the fact that you're introducing a genetically engineered virus and DNA to interface with your DNA, a lot more can go wrong with that type of an approach than just saying we're going to put some fat and polyethylene glycol around basically a cellular or software instruction and give it to you to go do something. The probably the worst case scenario in that model, if you're not allergic to the things that are inside that vaccine, is that the instructions for some reason don't do what they're supposed to do, and they make useless protein or something. Okay, a lot more can go wrong with your genetically engineered viruses and interfacing with your DNA and these types of things, at least on the surface. Now, why do they do the viral recombinant vector? Well, because the viruses are much more stable than the construction that they've kind of built around the mRNA, which means that durability is reflected with storage. The Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine both have to be stored at very low temperatures. Pfizer like -95, and Moderna has to be frozen. It can be refrigerated for a while, but it's not very durable. If you're using a viral vector, you just put it into a refrigerator like a normal fridge that people have, and it has a longer shelf life. And then there's some other things about perhaps ease of manufacturing and so forth. So that's why AstraZeneca went with that approach, and they'll have much higher distribution, and they don't need the cold chain. Now, there already are huge amounts of people working on freeze drying the mRNA vaccines and these types of things, so they can be just refrigerated, potentially even stored at room temperature long term. So we will see huge improvements in the adjuvants, huge improvements in the lipid layer designs, huge improvements in getting the software better and actually giving you more things like maybe a universal flu vaccine. And we'll see a lot of improvements in the supply chain dynamics of these. What is most exciting about the mRNA vaccines is the concept of a micro-vaccine manufacturer. So basically what you could do is give every hospital a special device. You can send software to it, and it can tell it how to make a vaccine against a recently discovered pathogen. Let's say an aerosolized hantavirus is out there. It's 30% mortality rate. If you know that what you're producing has a high degree of safety, even if it's not particularly efficacious, you can still make it and give it to people with the hope that perhaps it does something. You can literally make it at the hospital and inoculate the entire people there. You can do that with mRNA vaccines. And there's already companies like CureVac, for example, that are looking at that very platform. This is not the case with what Johnson & Johnson is doing, AstraZeneca is doing. The adenoviral vector is a much, much, much more involved process in terms of the complexity of the lab and these things that have to be done. So I do believe mRNA is the future. It opens up a whole bunch of things. Cancer vaccines, for example, where you can make bespoke custom vaccines against certain cancers to create an immunological response against tumors. And they have some great science on that. Might cure pancreatic cancer at some point. And there's a reason why Moderna is so excited about what they do. But it, of course, will take some time. to bring to market. Does it work on herpes? Herpes is a fascinating virus. It hides in strange ways. It can even hide in your brain, strange ways in the body. And they treat it with a whole class of drugs like acyclovir and valacyclovir and so forth. And it turns out that there's some things in common with herpes to HIV. So the enormous amount of research we put into HIV has actually helped us in the treatment of herpes. Like HIV, herpes doesn't go away. It comes back again and again and again and again because the initial virus can be destroyed, but it hides in the body and it can come back. And so a herpes vaccine would be a bellwether for enormous advancements in virology, and probably a good indication that an HIV vaccine will be developed in a reasonable period of time. So the answer is right now, no. But hopefully there's some hope in the future. Thoughts on category theory and homotopy type theory? Homotopy theory. Well, homotopy type theory is the one I like. Category theory is just a field of study. You know, algebraists tend to like it. I got a book on category theory over there. Quite useful in Haskell land. Like monads make sense from a category theoretical viewpoint. Homotopy theory is another field of study. Where people get very excited about homotopy theory is this concept of homotopy type theory, where you're taking homotopy theory and combining it with type theory in a way that gives you new foundations of mathematics. And that's something we are quite interested in, and something that could become one of the theoretical foundations of the Hilbert project to replace QAditas. So no particular thoughts about it, but there are some good free courses on YouTube if you're interested. And I'd highly recommend you learn a little bit about category theory if you're planning on learning Haskell, because it'll actually help you when you're thinking about monads. An HIV vaccine would cause the CCR5 mutation, the delta CCR5 receptor in the CD4 T lymphocyte. That was actually a very famous story where they found there was a correlation between a very particular mutation that happened to be related to bubonic plague and resistance to HIV. And it turned out if you had that mutation, you'd have a harder time contracting HIV. So this was actually one of the first places that vaccine people who were trying to create vaccines for HIV were looking in the 90s and 2000s, and they didn't have any success with it. But it's a great historical artifact that if you have a gene line that survived bubonic plague, the Black Death in Europe in the 14th century, somehow that would give you some innate resistance to HIV. Hi, Charles. Do you still do a keto diet? I don't do it enough. I should, and I'm going to start again next year. Very important to keep that going. And I think that it is a contributor to a healthy lifestyle. But you also need to work out and do a lot of other things. Are you a medical researcher or a crypto CEO? I'm confused. I did study a lot of biology back in the day. I almost became a doctor, but I decided that being a mathematician was a better idea. Then I decided being an entrepreneur was a better idea than being a mathematician. But I do have a long line of family members who are all doctors. Grandfather was a doctor, brother's a doctor, uncle's an infectious disease doctor, father's a doctor. A lot of medicine in the family. I was the black sheep who didn't do the medicine thing. I did do the EMT thing. That was fun. But virology is a fascinating field, and vaccinology is a fascinating field, and genetics is fascinating, especially given you can do things now. Before you studied things and said, oh, well, this is the way it is. It was like a rule lookup. You'd say, well, how does this work? Look it up. How does this work? Look it up. There's that old saying, like the physicists, they ask, like, what's 2 plus 2? You say, take 1.9999997 plus 1.99997 and approximately equals 4, a mathematician, you say 1.9 repeating to infinity and plus 1.9 repeating to infinity. That equals 4, because we have this beautiful delta epsilon. And you ask a biologist, what is 2 plus 2? He says 4. So how do you know? I looked the answer up. So the medicine has always been a bit textbooky in that respect. But now you can actually do things and think about things, and there's really cool stuff happening, bioinformatics and so forth. And at some point, I'll probably start a biotechnology company. The mushroom stuff that I'm doing is kind of a nice segue into that, because at some point when you do agricultural technology, you start doing genetic engineering. And so we'll do some CRISPR things there. And I'm really interested in biofluorescence. And it'd be super cool to actually create sterile biofluorescent plants for decorations. So you sell people plants that grow into, beautiful trees that glow in the dark, like a mushroom does, or, those beautiful caves that have bioluminescent creatures. And you can genetically engineer that. Well, if you have those capacities, you can start looking into alternative treatments. Like one area that I actually studied many, many, many years ago, when I was still interested in medicine, I was very interested in phage therapy. So bacteriophages are little viruses that actually kill bacteria. And they were very popular in certain Soviet circles, 1970s and 1960s in particular, as an alternative to antibiotic treatments, but they fell out of popularity. However, they really actually find some cool use cases where they put them in gels and you'd rub them on burns and things like that, and it would prevent bacterial infections. And now people are starting to actually look at them again more seriously, because there's a lot of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And they're a complementary treatment to antibiotics. The problem is the intellectual property works in such a way, it's very unlikely phage therapy would be profitable. And that's why it's under-researched. So if you're really rich and you can subsidize things, you might be able, with like a $30 to $50 million per year budget, to create an open source library of phages that co-evolve with the bacteria, and you combine them and mass manufacture them, and then you use them as either a topical or an injectable treatment to assist in the treatment of sepsis or MERS, or not MERS, but MRSA, and these types of things that are very problematic for people. Maybe it can help with the super gonorrhea that we're seeing floating around. Do you take lion's mane? I grow lion's mane, sir. It's hard to store them. Yes, but, what if you can use all these tricky things we're doing with mRNA vaccines and adenoviruses as a vector to introduce them? Think about that. How about that, huh? I did a video on bacteriophage. They don't create superbugs. I didn't say they created superbugs. I said they could be used to combat superbugs because they're a different vector and they co-evolve with the bacteria. Cardano hasn't made the new listings on Coinbase for Q1 of 2021. What's going on? Didn't you guys do the Rosetta integration? You guys are really obsessed with Coinbase. It's like part of your soul. Coinbase, Coinbase, Coinbase. We did the Rosetta integration. We have zero control over what Coinbase does. I don't handle listings. No one does. It's an open ecosystem. Coinbase will decide when Coinbase decides what Coinbase to do. As I mentioned many times before, they got a million things going on. They got to figure out what to do with XRP. They got the S1 issues with the SEC, and they're trying to do an IPO. They had a recent scandal with the whole social justice stuff, the New York Times article. They're busy people. They got their own thing going on, okay? If they come to me, we talk tech. They say, how do we integrate? Or how do we do that? I say, here's how you do that. We don't talk business like here's how you do listening or thing. We don't control that. It's their decision as an independent company of what to do, when to do, how to do it. And the reason why a lot of people ask about Coinbase is they have this bizarre belief that somehow when we get listed, if we get listed on an exchange like Coinbase, that the price will go to the moon and liquidity will be incredible and all these other things. It's like, guys, it doesn't work that way. It used to, a long time ago, you got listed on Coinbase, you'd see like a 50% appreciation in the asset. But there's so much liquidity already in Cardano that if we were to be listed on Coinbase, I don't really think it would have a huge market impact. Now, it's true that certain people who live in certain jurisdictions would suddenly get liquidity, like I believe New York State, for example, and that's great. And I'm very happy for them. But I have no control over any of that. And you guys keep asking when Coinbase, even if they were going to list us, they actually wouldn't tell me. They just don't do that. And so I don't know. In fact, what's going to happen if they list us is that I'm going to see a tweet or a message from somebody saying we've been listed. And I'll be like, oh, fuck. And I'll retweet it. That's what's going to happen. So I know as much as you guys know. All I can do is make the tech great and stable and make sure that the integration points look good and so forth. And independent companies like Binance and Bittrex and Coinbase and Bitstamp and Kraken, they all make decisions based on what makes sense for them. Their risk profiles, their customer demographics, the geographies they occupy, what they want to do. Okay, that's their choice as organizations. And when they come to us, it's usually that, hey, your wallet needs some improvement. We're having a problem. We have UTXO fragmentation. We have this, we have that. We say, oh, okay. And when we come to them, it's saying, hey, by the way, we're going to do this hard fork, and that might be problematic. You probably should upgrade your node. And they say, oh, that's a good idea. Can you make sure that we do that well? And we say, oh, yeah, we have this test net. We'll work with you guys on that. Make sure you get through that. That's our relationship with exchanges. It's not, hey, let's get this listed and get these financial products built and so forth. The people who do that stuff, they do that stuff for small cap shady coins, okay? The big coins, they don't have to pay listing fees. They don't have to negotiate these things. There's no boardroom deal with suits and ties where people figure that stuff out. That doesn't happen, okay? It's more, does this make sense for us and our customers? And if it's a big coin with $1 billion of trading volume, they're like, wow, we could get millions of dollars in trading fees if we listed something like this. That makes sense to an organization, and they'll pursue that. If it's too small, it doesn't make sense. It's a nuisance, right? So get off this Coinbase obsession. It's not going to have a massive impact on the ecosystem and somehow fundamentally change Cardano. It's not going to be like AD, BC, before Christ, after death. It's not going to be like before Coinbase, after Coinbase, BC, AC. It's not going to happen, okay? It's just an event like many, 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 many other events. Might be a good market event for the day. Who the hell knows? We all move on. Life moves on. And there's still an enormous amount of real things that have to be done, like improving use and utility, improving smart contracts, growing the ecosystem, getting more adoption, getting more real-life applications. Those are much, much more meaningful. So things like the success of Project Catalyst, things like the successful launch and a timely launch of Goguen, these are significantly more meaningful than Coinbase. But yet, that's the number one question that I get. Do you work well with Alex Cherpinoy? Yeah, Alex is a very good friend, and we still work on Ergo, and he actually still collaborates with us on ScoreX, and we're trying to get ScoreX into the Hyperledger group as a R&D chain. But he's a good kid, and he's really smart. One of the smartest people I've ever met. Is the Securities Exchange Commission the enemy of crypto? No, the regulators are not the enemy of crypto. Guys, let's be honest here. Our space created BitConnect, OneCoin, Mt. Gox, BitMEX, Crypty, thousands and thousands and thousands of scams that have hurt people. Regulators are like vampires in a good way. They come in when you invite them. Okay, vampire stands at the door, says, "Can I come in?" You say yes. What brings a regulator into an industry? Happy, well-functioned industry that are just everything is going right and everybody's thinking, like, how many regulators are there for mathematics? Is there the Mathematics Exchange Commission that sits down and says, we really need to look into those topologists? Those combinatorists, they're slippery, slippery people. Oh, we are deeply concerned about statistics. Yeah, there's some problems there, man. Serious problems. 64% of people know that. No, because it's like, what scandals occur in the mathematical world? Occasionally you have an older Fields medalist who claims he proved the Riemann hypothesis and turns out his brain's baked and it's a garbage paper. Okay, we're pretty good at self-regulating in that industry. On the other hand, why is the pharmaceutical industry regulated? Because they make stuff that you put into people's bodies. And if they fuck that up, they break your penis, they break your brain, they break your eyes, you go deaf. Okay, there's more than one people have gone deaf from an adverse reaction to an antibiotic. There are all kinds of bad things that can occur. So you need to regulate it because there are perverse incentives against your health. It's not just could harm occur, it's also the incentive set. If I make drugs, my incentive is maximal distribution and maximal money. Okay, that doesn't necessarily correlate to the safest product, the soundest product, the most efficacious product. The best case scenario is I could sell snake oil. The worst case scenario is the snake oil can kill you. What happened? 19th century, you had all these charlatans running around. Rockefeller's father, David Avery Rockefeller, he sold snake oil. It went all around, okay, selling stuff that didn't work, and it was loaded with laudanum and cocaine and all kinds of horrible stuff. So you regulate it. Why? Because you notice that the market's behaving badly and it's killing people. So let's look at crypto. You have the ICO boom. You have tons of scandals and scams. You have rampant insider trading. You have wash trading on exchanges. You have exchanges failing and the principals of the exchanges stealing the money and fleeing abroad. You have software flaws that were made on purpose to steal people's money. You have massive misrepresentations. You have impersonations. You have people claiming they're using project capital for something, but they're actually using to buy yachts and Miami houses and prostitutes and rah, rah, rah. That is a big neon sign at the front of your door. Vampire come in. Our industry did that. We didn't self-regulate. We didn't stop the agency failures. We created a neon sign and welcomed a vampire. And now they're here. And we're going to complain that they're doing stuff, filing lawsuits, getting involved like a bull in a china shop. Of course they are. And their ability to act is proportional to the sophistication of the tools and the modernity of the laws. The Howey test is an artifact of the 1940s. It cannot work in stem cell finance, where an asset can be everything. It can be a currency, a commodity, and a security, all at the same time. It can be everything and nothing. It's like some fucking Buddhist koan. Okay? We've invited them in, and now they're doing their best job to sort the whole thing through. So people look at Ripple, for example, and they say, oh, how dare the SEC do this? They're destroying innovation. And they say, guys, we are a consumer protection agency. Our job is to hold businessmen accountable when they do nasty things. Okay. And why are they involved with Ripple? Is it because deep down inside, they absolutely want Ripple to be a security? Probably not. They're unhappy with Ripple because the principals of the company sold $600 million of XRP to retail investors and paid themselves that. Guys, when I got paid to build Cardano, we received about 2.4 billion ADA. It's about 8% of the supply. Now, the market value of that from the pre-sale was $6 million, give or take. And it was a huge risk because who knows, 3,000 cryptocurrencies, the vast majority are flops. So we didn't know where it was going to go, but we decided just to hold it. So we created a vesting thing and said, we're not even going to be completely unvested until 2019. I remember when ADA went to $1.30 and I was sitting on $2.4 billion, 2.4 billion ADA, which was worth almost $3 billion. And we didn't sell. We sold none of it. Zero. It was just sitting there. And every day I was looking at that and saying, we're in a bubble. These markets are not sustainable. Holy shit. I'm a billionaire from this one thing in my company register. There's no regulation or law that prevents me from doing something, but I felt it was irresponsible to sell. I self-regulated as a company. Now, other people sold. EOS sold. They sold $4 billion of an asset. And the SEC certainly went after them, but only fined them $24 million and let them keep the $4 billion. So I was so upset when that happened. I was like, okay, but that's just the way it works. And so XRP, they sold 600 million, actually sold $1.3 billion worth of the asset. And, the SEC saw that, and obviously they thought that was Enron-like behavior, bad behavior. That's why when I read the 71 pages, I thought for sure they were trying to build a 10b5 case. So it's strange that they're just going after a refund. But it's clear why that vampire came into the house. But you have to self-regulate. You have to have principles. You have to have ethics. You have to accept that sometimes you can't do things that even though are in your best interest because you have a moral responsibility for everyone else. And at that time, it made no sense to do a mass divestment at the top of a bubble in an ecosystem. We held, and that holding lost 90% of its value. Is what it is. I've lost more money on paper than most people will make in a lifetime, in 100 lifetimes, in 1,000 lifetimes. You say, oh, well, turn the page, move on. It is what it is. That's life. Why the Securities Exchange Commission exists is because not everybody would make that decision. And sometimes they do it differently. And if they do it differently in a way that harms a small scale buyer, investor, other person, that's a moral hazard. And if you allow that to happen unfettered, then you have markets that basically are a wealth transfer mechanism from the poor to the rich. That's why the SEC was created. 1933. What happened? 1929 was the beginning of the Great Depression from the collapse of the markets. Why did that happen? You had radically inaccurate information being broadcasted out. You had boiler rooms. You had tons of speculation that was very unhealthy. You had people borrowing 10 times the amount of money that they made per year to trade stocks that turned out weren't even real. They were based on fantasies. And people with insider information were trading against that. And they knew when the symphony was going to come to an end before anybody else. And they made huge profits on the backs of the poor. And so when the poor voted, they threw Hubert Hoover out of office and they put in a guy who promised that he'd rebalance the scales for them. That's where the SEC came from. And they've had an 80-plus year mandate where sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail. I'm deeply disturbed, for example, where Chinese companies list on U.S. exchanges and they're not subject to the same transparency requirements as Microsoft and Apple and these things. That's a serious problem. And when they do get involved, they get involved in a very ham-fisted way. And it is what it is. You have to deal with it. Who is ultimately negligent? It's not the Securities Exchange Commission. It's the United States House of Representatives. It is a job of the Congress and the Senate to update regulations and to create new regulatory agencies as technology evolves. Where is the cryptocurrency legislation? They've known about the industry for 10 years, and because they can't agree on anything, even a fucking $600 check, because they're just a bunch of cocksucking piece of shit assholes who only care about themselves and their popularity and their reelection potential, and they don't give a damn about America or a damn about our industry, they've allowed regulation to stagnate. And FinCEN and the CFTC and the SEC and all these other agencies are left to somehow find a way to better procrustes 80-year-old regulation to a field that is like stem cell finance. It's impossible. And they're doing their best. The SEC has actually had a very light hand. It's insulting when the Ripple principles go, they're destroying the whole industry. Guys, there were, I think, over 1,000 ICOs. They've only had a few dozen enforcement actions, most of which were clear and obvious frauds. Some were geopolitical, like Telegram, for example. And where and when they could come to an amicable solution, more often than not, they found a way to do that and had the decency to contact people and talk to them. Ripple's acting like suddenly out of the blue, something has just magically happened. Why do you have a tolling agreement with the SEC then? Where the fuck did that come from, Brad? You were talking to these guys for a while, and obviously your negotiations broke down. When you threatened to move the company to the UK, that was a bellwether for that. So it's a complex topic. There's a lot of nuances here. There's a lot of idiots in the space that just go, well, this is a security and this is a security and the SEC is going to do this and Bitcoin is king and rah. You know, like Max Kaiser and Tone and these other guys, they're just frothing for the mouth, idiots. And they don't really understand how this works. At the end of the day, the regulation doesn't matter. As an entrepreneur, I cannot follow regulation completely and perfectly because I'm doing new things in 52 fucking countries. There's no way to be in full compliance with every single thing. No company in the history of humanity in the world has made every jurisdiction and dominion that they operate in 100% happy 100% of the time. So what you do is you have a transcendent principle. Is what I'm doing ethical? Is what I'm doing moral? Is what I'm doing obviously good for the consumer? And if you can't answer that with a yes, then you're probably at some point going to piss off a regulator, if anything, because you're creating a political incentive for the regulator to go after you. Facebook is not really violating laws as they're written, but they're being sued by 48 states for antitrust. They rock the boat too much with Libra, with the censorship of free speech, with the appearance of picking sides in elections. You piss off half the country, you could be motherfucking Teresa. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to be hit with a lawsuit by some government agency somewhere. Trump, love him or hate him, when he leaves office, somewhere, some state, somehow, is going to try to charge him with a crime. Because there's big political kudos to being the Kingslayer and putting a guy like that in jail. Maybe they work, maybe they don't work. It's politics. Politics is about appeasing people when injustices come. Like the pharma bro, Schreckle. You know, he's a villain in the press. He raises the price of drugs too high. It doesn't matter if he actually commits a crime or not. The appearance of his character creates a big red target on his back. So you know what? I just start from, is it ethical? Is it moral? And am I screwing people or not? I always try to make sure that the answers are yes, it's ethical, it's moral, and no one's being screwed in the process. And when I know something, you know something. We try to make things as transparent as we can. Now, obviously, we have a general counsel who's a domain expert in securities laws and these things. And we're a software company. We build protocols. We don't do trading and market making. We don't do ICOs. We stay out of those markets, okay? But at the end of the day, because we build protocols, we have to understand these things, and we take a step back and we follow those basic principles, and we try to stay within that framework, and we try to be good actors as much as we can. The problem is everybody's terrified because lawyers never give you definitive answers. They say, it depends. For example, in the SEC filing, they said, well, the CEO of Ripple got a memo from a law firm that XRP could be a security. You're damn right. In 2012, every law firm in the United States, including an analysis of Bitcoin, would write a more likely than not opinion, even if they think it's not a security, with a disclaimer that it could be. Of course, they're going to say something like that because it's ambiguous. It's like, who's Batman? You can have a hypothesis, and unless you're God and it's Bruce Wayne, everybody pick their favorite person. So of course they'd say something like that. It's ambiguous. What matters is, what do you do about it? How do you treat people? Do you have a privileged position over other people? And are you taking advantage of that privileged position over other people? Are you following best practices? And if you can't find best practices, are you trying to create best practices? These basic principles and things. With Ethereum, we had zero guidance. We talked to a former commissioner of the SEC. We talked to a law firm, Prior Cashman. They wrote a letter, a more likely than not opinion for us, and we thought about it. And we said, well, let's try to build something. They created a foundation. We worked with a prominent law firm, MME Partners, try to do as much as possible on the blockchain, try to make sure that everybody participated the same way. We did what we could do with zero guidance. And reasonable people could look at that and say, well, they tried their best and it ended up working, so okay, no harm, no foul. Where you get into a problem is when you play games with semantics. You're screwing people, but you're trying to be smart and outsmart people and build a structure where you win guaranteed, and then that's at the expense of someone else. Okay? So when you build in, you always get a big payout no matter what, even if the project fails. That's a moral hazard. And even if regulation hasn't evolved to a point to hold you accountable, your soul's going to corrode at some point, and people are going to know you're a scumbag. Nobody wants to do business with you. That's why Donald Trump has a terrible reputation in terms of construction and contractors and these things. Why? Because he actually told people, one of his business principles was, if you don't have to pay and you think you can get away with screwing people, do it. So you have these plumbers and these electricians and these drywallers coming to his building. They'd work hundreds of hours constructing things, and then they'd send the invoice, and Trump would drag his feet on it and force them to sue, hoping that they would settle for less on the invoice. He was notorious for that, notorious for defaults and bankruptcies. In fact, blacklisted from most banks for lending. And that was his character as a businessman. Now, he's not in jail, so he got away with it. But I have zero respect for that business practice. It's not ethical, it's not moral, and sure as hell is screwing poor people. And there's huge asymmetries in power there. The reason these agencies exist, the reasons why we make them vampires, they need to be strong enough to overcome the strong personalities on the other side. It is a very big problem. The regulators in some cases are co-opted by private industry. Why? Because when you're a regulator, you are paid government salary. Tell me how much a GS-13 makes. Certainly not as much as a junior associate at a law firm. You leave government, and if you were nice to the right people, somehow you get a board job. Somehow you get a job at a senior law firm. Somehow you get something, and now you're making 7 figures, 8 figures, 9 figures. That's a hazard, because knowing that if you're nice to certain industries that you shouldn't be nice to, you should be neutral and fair to, can result in a 9-figure job, an 8-figure job when you leave office. You might have a tendency to go down that road and be corrupted by that. They have not solved that problem. Ben Losky is now working for Ripple. He's on their board. He destroyed the entire cryptocurrency industry in New York. And his reward is first to be paid $600 an hour trying to get people a bit license, and now to be a board member of Ripple. It's a disgusting thing. So it's certainly problematic. Steve Mnuchin, when he leaves the Treasury Secretary role, he's going to go right back into the banking swamp. And I guarantee he's going to be sitting as a CEO of something or an advisor of something with a 8-figure, 9-figure payout every year. And the people he took care of when he was the Treasury Secretary will be the ones cutting those checks. That's why people have problems with regulators. If they were good, virtuous, always directly aligned with the will of the consumer, would view them as positive actors like firefighters, but they're not. So it's very nuanced and mixed. And it's a very complex topic. Securities law is super complex. You go to law school for it. You study it for a while. There's so many nuances here. We already did. It's IOG, input output global. Hi, Charles. What is your relationship with YouTubers such as BitBoy and Crypto Crow? They call me up and they say, would you like to be on our show? I say, sure. I show up. They ask me questions. I answer the questions. Then I say, this was great. Thanks. And I go to the next interview. That's my relationship. Mr. Hoskinson, why the bull's head symbol for the Daedalus wallet? That is not a bull's head. That is a minotaur head. The minotaur was a mythological creature that lived in the labyrinth. Daedalus was the creator of the labyrinth. So the labyrinth was built because no chains could bind the minotaur. And so by basically building a giant maze and putting the minotaur in it, it couldn't escape the maze. And so Daedalus is the name of the wallet. Daedalus is the creator of the labyrinth, and the Minotaur is the most prominent creature within the labyrinth. So that's why the symbol is the Minotaur. Charles, what are your thoughts on Edward Snowden? A case study on who not to recruit as a spy. So his parents were spies. They were deeply connected with the U.S. government. They kind of gave him a leg up. He tried to do the whole special forces thing to differentiate a little bit, broke his legs and got kicked out of that for medical discharge. And then because of those familial connections and, you know, a really bright guy, I got recruited at NSA and CIA. So there's a paradox when you recruit a spy. The paradox is you want super charismatic, very affable people that can be everything to everyone. They can connect to people, build trust with people, and build relationships with people. Because at the end of the day, spies are recruitment machines. You see all these movies where they're putting probes in and secret cameras and doing spy shit. 90% of the job of an operative is recruitment. So they're always looking for people, trying to convince that person to betray their government and give information to the US government, okay? And they have a whole profile for it. It's called MICE. It stands for compromise by money. So you bribe people by ideology. So basically you're capitalist and they're communist, but they want to be capitalist, for example, or maybe religious ideology. For example, in Afghanistan, we used the fact that we were a Christianish nation to really help the Mujahideen come to our side because the Soviets were atheists and they knew that, you know, while they didn't quite like our religion, if the Soviets got over, they would eradicate the Islamic faith in Afghanistan, or at least that was the PSYOPs perspective of it. And we pointed to what happened in Georgia, for example, was the destruction of the Orthodoxy Church there as an example, and it really helped in recruitment. So ideology, compromise. For example, you find out Ahmed is gay, and if he's found out to be gay in his country, they'll kill him. So you can use it as blackmail. That's what Epstein did, right? You know, got kids to sleep with prominent people. Say, oh, it'd be a real shame if the world found out you were a pedophile. Maybe you should help us. And ego. Maybe there's a guy and he's a prominent person and he got fired or pushed down the chain or something. It happens a lot with scientists. They get passed up for promotion or they get demoted. But at one point they were running the nuclear weapons program or the biotech program or something. And they got a big chip on their shoulder and very angry about it. So what a spy does is a spy takes advantage of those domains, thinks about it, and then says, how do I recruit these people and convince them to give us information or do things for us, up including to wet work. It means they murder people on your behalf, okay? Like the recent nuclear scientist that was killed in Iran, killed by local assets. All right, and a really cool rigged up drone gun thing. Okay, so you want somebody who's really charismatic and can magnetically connect to people and very larger than life. But then at the same time, you want somebody who is totally okay with never telling anybody what they've done. They could hack into the FSB headquarters and find out all the secret agents working for Russia and every Russian operation, that the greatest intelligence gain in the history of the CIA. And the only person who can know about that are the people who have a need to know. And they go home to their wife or their husband and just pretend like nothing happened. How was your day? It was a good day. Anything interesting? Lunch was pretty good. So the problem with Snowden was that he was really good on the first part. He's a very charismatic guy. And he has kind of the family heritage, and so they kind of welcomed him in. But Snowden failed on the second part. He wants people to know he's a great guy. He has ego, huge ego. Okay? He must save the United States from the spy state. He alone knows what the Constitution says and what's best. Maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't agree with it, but in his head, he's a hero. And he must be a hero and stand for the American principles and the way. This is a catastrophic recruitment failure for a spy. Because a spy, they can't operate in that dimension. Even if they have personal misgivings, they have to be willing to accept that as reality as it is. I work for this organization. They trust me to do the job that they've hired me to do. And the wisdom of what we're doing, that's going to have to be decided at policy levels above. And if you disagree, you resign and leave. That's the culture that they try to inculcate, and it's mostly successful. So Snowden is a recruitment failure from that respect. And it actually so traumatized the agency and the US federal government that they launched a slew of PSYOPs programs and psychological inquiries, and they even did analytics programs. Like Dr. Bader over in DARPA, he created something out of IIO called Prodigal. And basically the point of Prodigal was to create a predictive AI agent using graph theory and ML and all this really cool stuff that would monitor people who operate in a clearance setting, because those are data-rich settings. They, with your CAC card, know every time you go for the bathroom, when you come in, when you leave, your social contacts, and so forth. And they look for discrepancies. And then they try to retrodict those data sets to predict anomalies. In fact, Prodigal got so sophisticated that they were able to predict that Nadal Hassan was going to kill a bunch of people through retrodicted data. And the same for Snowden defecting and so forth. Because these defectors who are ego-driven, they leave a wake, a slime trail that retroactively makes a lot of sense. The signs are there. For example, this recent bombing in Nashville, a guy built the RV bomb. There were definite little fingerprints here and there that he was becoming radicalized and clearly was thinking about doing something. There was even allegations in August of 2019 that he was building a bomb. His girlfriend called him in, and the police actually said the girlfriend was crazy, and they tried to put her in a psych ward. It's crazy. I think that's the fuck up of the century for Nashville. But, he was talking about 5G conspiracy theories and the lizard people conspiracy, and that's mostly harmless for most people. But then combine it that he's like Google searching ammonium nitrate and, these other types of things. And so the point of Prodigal is to say it will be that aggregator to a point where it can proactively, predictively depict these things. The government doesn't build stuff like that because they're completely happy with the people that work for them. They build stuff like that as a response to a trauma in the organization. Counterintelligence, having spies turn on you and become double agents, is super traumatizing to the morale and culture of the organization. It damages them in so much of a way because each and every person in that organization feels the betrayal. They're all looked upon with suspicion. They're all looked upon with admonishment, and it diminishes the job. The other thing is that, you can only tell about the existence of the capability, but you can't talk about how the capability was actually used. So, okay, we're alerted to PRISM. Was PRISM used in ways that were actually beneficial to the world? Maybe, maybe not. But you, as the organization, can't talk about that. So you get the allegation and the attack, but you can't defend. And that further exacerbates the trauma of the organization. And this is why there's, in the intelligence circle, such deep-seated hatred with Snowden, even amongst people who agree that Snowden's arguments are right. Not everybody's monolithic at the NSA or CIA or DIA or the other 16 intelligence agencies and says, we absolutely have to archive every bit of data ever produced by every person, have total information awareness, and then use that to create profiles on each and every person and proactively predict who's a threat or not. Some people think that's antithetical to everything that America stands for. But their love of the organization, its mission, its culture, and the good things that they perceive the organization does outweighs their umbrage to that particular program, or their belief that that program can somehow be responsibly run or moderated. And thus they hate Snowden. Now, it's not the decision of the intelligence agencies to decide if Snowden is a hero or a villain. It's above their pay grade. It's the decision of the American people and the political class responding to the will of the American people. And frankly, he probably should get a pardon at this point. It's difficult to know, though, because there are things we don't know, like his relationship with Russia. Why did he go to Russia and get asylum there versus another country? Why did he flee to Hong Kong, of all places, when he first left Hawaii? These type of things. Was there some sort of Chinese government relationship? Who knows? There's a lot of unanswered questions that are probably known by the FBI and the intelligence agencies that aren't known to us, the general public, and they can't necessarily tell us because that would reveal capabilities. So that's problematic. That said, a lot of time has passed. The damage has been done. Commutation or pardon probably would make sense. And it's one of those things where we have to do things differently as a society. It's already done differently in the clearance setting. There's enormously more scrutiny put on people who hold security clearances and patterns of behavior. There's a lot more caution and care with the handling of classified information than there was even just 7 years ago as a direct result of Edward Snowden. And it certainly has had a huge impact on the world as a whole, on the intelligence world as a whole. You know, all this said, spies are not good people. They're not bad people, but they're certainly not good people. They lie for a living. They kill people for a living. They manipulate people for a living. They do all kinds of horrible things. A lot of this anti-vax propaganda, for example, is funded by Russia. Why? And China. Because they know if they can convince 30 to 40% of the US population to be vehemently anti-vaccine and not take the vaccine, it will exacerbate the lockdowns in the United States and make them last another 3 to 6 months, if not longer. That will cause catastrophic economic damage to the United States. So if you're the leader of China and you look at how do we hurt the US or diminish its geopolitical role, if somebody comes to you and says, give me $20 million and I will run a PSYOPs campaign with hackers and bots to convince people that Bill Gates is depopulating the world and these vaccines carry sterilization or quantum dots or whatever in them. And if I can do that and get 40% of the US population to agree to it, and they have vaccine hesitancy, this will cause 500,000 more deaths and it will cause 6 more months of lockdown. Would you take that deal if you know that the economic losses in the US would be your gain? Of course. Now, what kind of a fucked up person is gleeful about that type of conduct and behavior? Murdering people and PSYOPs campaigns that damage things that cause chicanery, havoc, and chaos. Not a normal person. And so maybe they do it because they have a profound nationalistic view that what they're doing is great for the nation. Maybe they do it because they can divorce the challenge of the task from the morality of the task. But one thing's clear, once someone has entered the spy class, they should never be trusted again in society. You know, outside of just executing the spy stuff, they've crossed a moral threshold where the ends justify the means. So they should rise no higher than the darkness that they've lived in, unless they find some redemption and all of that, because the ends do not justify the means. I've never believed that, and I've never believed that it's a good idea to give people an unlimited license to do things in the darkness for the greater good that harms so many people, especially when the people who decide the greater good are people who are not invested in the greater good of society. They're only invested in their own greater good. And we've seen how our political class has failed us. So Snowden's a fascinating case. It's a fascinating case of organizational psychology. It's a fascinating case of reaction and so forth. It's a fascinating case of a recruitment failure where they clearly got the first part right, but the second part wasn't there. It's a fascinating case of a political problem. How do you forgive and accept and allow society to grow, but at the same time don't destroy or demoralize institutions you rely upon to do things? And it's a fascinating case of the inner workings of organizations that we normally don't get to think about and see. So lot to parse there, and really complicated guy. I think the first time I've ever talked about it in detail, but that's the point of these AMAs, is you guys get to hear my thoughts. Trump can't get the vaccine yet. This is actually an example of the dishonest media. There are some people in the media saying, why is Trump not getting vaccinated? He's irresponsible. He should get vaccinated. First, it's not really clear after you get it that there's much urgency to get vaccinated, because your natural immunity probably lasts for quite some time. There are certainly a lot of people who have contracted it a second time, but relative to the totality of all people, it's very uncommon. And usually the second case is much more mild. And data from Wuhan completely invalidates this asymptomatic super spreader. The reason why Trump can't get vaccinated is because he received the monoclonal antibody treatment. And actually that prevents the vaccine from working. So you have to wait for that to flush out. And I think the Regeneron ones take about 90 days. So he's still inside that window and he can't get it until then. And I guarantee he's probably going to get it, because whatever his beliefs are, he's a very self-centered guy. Of course, the media won't talk about that. Yeah, that's accurate. I think that Snowden should receive some clemency or pardon. And there has to be a kind of a come to Jesus moment. What they should do is negotiate. They should make a deal that if Snowden is willing to go to a neutral country, he can sit down and have a come to Jesus moment about exactly how he survived in Russia. Putin is not a dude that just wakes up in the morning and says, boy, I can't wait to be a humanitarian. I can't wait to help the world and do things for people. No, nothing is free in Russia under that regime. So the fact that he lives there and is able to have freedom of movement, and the Russian government is so nice to him, there may have been some reciprocity in that. So there needs to be a real establishment of what was actually leaked. We know what was leaked publicly, but why were China and Russia so affable? And some understanding of the optics of pardoning. And Snowden's whole argument, and this goes back to that ego component. I cannot return to the United States because I will not get a fair trial. They hate me so much, even though I'm this giant celebrity. If I return, I will not get a fair trial. The media will do nothing. I'll be persecuted and martyred. It's like, shut the fuck up. Go and have a neutral meeting. Sit down with guys from the Justice Department and the intelligence agencies and sort it all out. Figure it all out. At the end of it, if there's good faith there and honesty there, then give the guy a pardon, or make a deal where he takes a plea and it's time served or something like that, and then he can go into the political class and be one of these guys that gets a job at Harvard or MIT and talks about privacy and data, and it'll have this like, superhuman appeal that people have, all these ex-hackers have. So I think that's probably the best way of doing it. If I was president, that's what I would do. I'd have people reach out to him and say, get the hell out of Russia. You have to come home. Come on now. It's a disgrace to your family and the other people that you're living abroad. The United States is not the evil monster you're making it out to be. Okay, PRISM bad. I get it. But let's talk about this. And let's be clear here. PRISM is baby food compared to what China has constructed with social credit in the Great Firewall. Okay, they have concentration camps in Western China. Let's not pretend like the US is alone on the world stage in terms of surveillance and the execution of surveillance. And you know what? There's no situation like the KGB in historic Russia or the Stasi in East Germany where there would be systematic oppression of opposing political viewpoints. We see flirtation with that from time to time, like Obama spying, for example, on the Trump campaign. Certainly very distasteful, worse than Watergate, in my view. But that's not systematic, okay? It's not the case that every member of the Libertarian Party is being surveilled by the government and they're randomly taken and gulagged. That happens in Russia. That happens in China. These are things, these are facts, these occur, okay? So don't believe there's a moral equivalency there. And the problem with Snowden is that he is a figurehead for anti-American propaganda, because what he does is he points out the sins of this country, but he doesn't in any way equate it to the sins or proportionality of the sins of other countries. So those other countries are more than happy to use him as a useful idiot to legitimize the things that they do, or say we're big violators of human rights and so forth. That must be addressed. If he wants a pardon and a return to normal society, he can no longer be used as a propaganda figurehead for how bad America is. And there's just no reason to placate him in that way and stroke his ego in that way, because he's already going to be rich. He comes back, he'll best-selling books and interviews and $100,000 speaking fees. We make the controversial celebrity. So just because he was so controversial and has got this mysterious background, the man will be a millionaire and live like a king if he was to return to the United States and these charges be dropped. So he has a very strong incentive to play ball here. And as for efficacy of his actions, a lot has to be done. And there's bipartisan agreement to keep these power structures in place. And I think the things that were brought up during the Church Committee and these other things that reined in the CIA and the intelligence industry has faded a bit, and especially with the FISA courts, and that has to be resolved. And unfortunately, there's bipartisan agreement to keep doing that. The best chance we had in the last 50 years of breaking that was the Trump administration, because Obama used these powers against Trump. So he had a very strong incentive to undo it. Problem is he was incompetent. So he had no idea how to actually undo the things that fucked him. In fact, the very things were used against him in the Mueller investigation and so forth. It's another example of how power requires finesse. Charles, are you stronger than a rebel shock trooper? No. That girl could kick my ass, man. Would you take the vaccine? I've been asked this question many times. There is no the vaccine. That's like saying the pill. By February, there will be 4 vaccines approved in the United States: Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca. They're all different. They all have different safety and efficacy and they use two different mechanisms of action. One's mRNA, one's recombinant viral vectors. The one that I think is the safest and is going to have the least side effects based upon the data I've seen is the Novavax vaccine, which is coming out. They've just started their phase 3 clinical trial in the US. It's not clear to me if they can use their clinical trial in the UK to apply for emergency use authorization. If they can, it'll come in February. If they can't, it'll come in April to May. Now, that vaccine is just protein and an adjuvant. That's it. There's no genetic material, no cell interaction. It's basically they take moth cells, they use it to make the spike protein, they scoop them all up, they put them in nanoparticles, and then they inject that into your body. It's a foreign agent. Your body's immune system says, whoa, we got to do something here, and it creates an immune response. I firmly believe that that's probably going to be the safest bet. There's ample evidence of that from HPV vaccine to other things that have done this in the past. I think the hepatitis B vaccine as well, that it works very well. So that's the one I'm going to get if it's effective. And of course, we'll have safety data and so forth. I don't think anything's wrong with the mRNA vaccines. I think they're quite safe. I think they would never be approved in a commercial setting outside of emergency use authorization because the side effect profile is too high. 80% of the people who get them, they have some reaction, like really painful arm, fever, chills. One person in the Pfizer trial, they shivered so bad their tooth cracked. That's not exactly consumer-friendly, no more tears shampoo type of vaccination. The dosage is probably too high. The formula probably needs to be rejiggered a bit. Maybe they should go from 2 to 3 shots. Who the fuck knows? If you were talking about normal consumer medicine, no one would take it if they have so much pain. And we've seen a lot of people have problems with that. Now, does it kill you? No. Does it create permanent damage? No. It's just super uncomfortable for a day or two, if that. And that's okay to be super uncomfortable for a day or two, to recover or be immune to a disease that has a 0.3% chance of killing you, to be immune to a disease that can permanently strip you of your taste or cause myocarditis or vasculitis or brain problems or permanent damage to your lungs. My brother's a doctor up in Wyoming, and he has a whole ICU full of patients who have coronavirus right now, some of which are in their 20s and 30s. It's not just all old people. And even when these patients recover, some of them have permanent disabilities as a consequence of being infected with this, including being on oxygen, chronic fatigue, where they're so tired they have a hard time taking a shower. To say that I feel bad for a day or two to be immune to the potential of that, I mean, flip it. Would you take a vaccine that had a 0.3% chance of death and a higher chance of permanent disability? No. So then why are you volunteering to take that vaccine from infection by not taking the vaccine? So I say you have two choices in the vaccine, either nature's vaccine or man's vaccine. And nature's vaccine, you know what the side effect profile is of that. And you can pretend like it doesn't exist. There's a lot of full ICUs and a lot of people recovering, millions of them, who profoundly disagree with your assessment. It's real. It certainly has happened. I know people who have died from this, okay? It's not the end-all, be-all. I mean, there's certainly horrible diseases. I remember traveling throughout Africa. I happened to be in a country during an Ebola outbreak, and I had to quarantine in that country for a while because they wouldn't let me out of the country. The Ebola camps that they had, the mortality rate was 60%. 60%. 6 people out of 10 would die. The 4 who recovered, almost all of them had permanent disabilities in some way or another, severe disabilities in some way or another from recovering. Really terrible. And what was so horrible about it was that one family member would go, but you kind of knew the other family members were probably infected, so they would show up a day or two later, and you just watch them die one after another. The mother dies on Tuesday, the husband dies on Thursday, 2 of the 3 kids die by Saturday. And you just knew that that was going to happen all the way through. Horrible, horrible disease. Coronavirus is not Ebola, okay? So the problem with our media is it convinced the world the coronavirus was Ebola. And then when it turned out that wasn't true, it became like the parent who told you, don't do drugs, because if you do drugs, your life is destroyed. You do the drugs and your life isn't destroyed, so your parent loses credibility. So then you start believing that drugs are completely safe and totally safe, and there's no problems at all with them. And of course, you Google Florida man, and you'll find out that those are problems, right? How many potheads do you know? Yeah, marijuana's not too bad, but God, if you smoke it every day, you're a fucking loser. More often than not, you have no motivation. You're not doing anything. You're not in a high functioning part of society because you're always just stoned, and nobody wants to work with a stoner. Come on, we all know these people. They're dredges, and it's something you do in your 20s and hope to God you get out of it by your 30s. So when your parents say don't do drugs, they were kind of really telling you don't become that person, but maybe they lied and said, oh, well, it's Ebola. It's so bad it'll kill you. And that's what the media did. They lied about coronavirus. They said coronavirus is the Spanish flu. Coronavirus is the apocalypse. It will kill you. 5% of the time, you're going to drop dead. And even if you don't drop dead, everything's horrible. Instead, what they should have been is intellectually honest and said, if you fall into these particular groups, you're going to have a really hard time. Now, if you're outside of those particular groups, you still could have a hard time, but you'll probably be okay. But do recognize that if you get it, you are a weapon, and you're going to be spreading it to the people who are vulnerable. So until we figure out how to take care of these vulnerable people, it's probably prudent that we as a society scale back a bit and be much more reasonable about things. That's a moderate message that could have been pushed. Instead, they lied. They said, if you are a kid who's 12 years old, you are going to die if you get coronavirus at the same rate than if you're a 78-year-old man with congestive heart failure and severe diabetes and 400 pounds. Come on. There's no equivalent. Less than 100 children under the age of 14 have died of coronavirus. Almost all of them were immunocompromised or had congenital disorders or other such things. It doesn't kill kids. Stop lying to people. Okay? Why are the schools closed? Not because we're worried about the kids, because we want to protect teachers. Stop lying to people. The media lied and lied and lied and lied and lied. So people who are sick of the lies, myself included, they start just thinking, oh, fuck everything, right? But the real thing should be nature's vaccine, man's vaccine, side effect profile of nature's vaccine, side effect profile of man's vaccine. And you compare and contrast the two, there's no equivalency there. Whatever we're injecting into people, it is so much safer than what coronavirus will do. You probably could inject horse urine into people, and that'd be safer than what coronavirus does to people. It's a horrible disease. Influenza is a horrible disease. And 330,000 people have died of this. We can argue about those numbers, but let's be clear here. A factor of 3 to 4 more have recovered with permanent disabilities. If you walked in 2019 and told me that 1.2 million Americans are suddenly going to be afflicted with something that permanently disables them, is that a problem? More than all the people who have died in World War I and World War II in U.S. casualties, having a permanent disability. I said, that's a tragedy. It's a national tragedy of a scale that is unimaginable. And that's what just happened. If we had a vaccine, none of that would happen. Almost all of them would have not had a serious case. So are you telling me that these vaccinations are so damning and horrible and terrible that somehow is going to be worse than the rest of what has already occurred? Come on, be intellectually honest. And don't fucking Dunning-Kruger your way out of this and be so self-assured and just no. It's all a hoax. It's all a scam. Is there power dynamic? Oh, yeah, of course. The government take advantage of people to gain power and belittle us and bully us? Of course. Do mass work? Maybe, maybe not. Hard to say. Depends on the context, how they're working. Yeah, it's nuanced. I agree with you. But don't for a fucking moment believe that somehow man's vaccine is worse than what nature is giving us right now. It's terrible what nature is giving us right now. It's a national catastrophe, and it's going to hurt, and it's already devastated and hurt a lot of people. Scientists found a way to get us out of this. And government incompetence, propaganda, and bad media has exacerbated a problem that could have been resolved. Should we have done lockdowns? No. They were terrible ideas. They made no sense. Who had the solution? Taiwan. They studied it for 17 years after the first coronavirus, and they had a war map like no other country. 7 people died in Taiwan of coronavirus. 7 of a country of 20 million people. Hyper urbanized. Everybody's living on top of each other, taking mass transit. 7. Think about that. So could we have done better? Yeah. And we should have. And the real response to all of this is, let's get out of it and let's burn down every institution that fucked us. The rampant corruption in Operation Warp Speed, their incompetence where they had 9 months to figure out how to distribute vaccines. They can't even vaccinate more than 200,000 people a day. The funding behind who got money and who didn't get money with Operation Warp Speed for vaccine deployment. The fact that these companies were left to their own devices to structure the phase 3 clinical trials. Why did none of these include sterilizing immunity trials in tandem with the vaccination? What does that mean? It proves that the vaccines prevent transmission. Why would that be useful? Because it would end the quarantines. It would end the social distancing. It would end the mask wearing because you can't spread it after you've got. We could have proven that. Was that baked into the clinical trials? No. Why? I don't know. You fucking tell me. I'm angry as hell over how much bad stuff has happened throughout all of this, but I'm not going to be part of the problem. I'm going to get vaccinated, of course. Why not? It's not going to harm me. I'm fine. You know, I'd have a better chance of developing a problem from all of the lifestyle things I've done throughout my life and the bizarre diseases I've contracted from Lassa fever on other such things throughout my life than anything that these guys are injecting into me. My brother and dad have already been vaccinated. They're fine. Okay? It's okay. It's not going to create a problem here. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. And part of the solution is hold every politician who fucked us accountable, demand economic analysis of the lockdowns and once they're proven to be non-effective, fire every single person who's responsible for it, get restitution, a class action lawsuit against the government in some way for the businesses that were destroyed and the lives that were destroyed as a direct consequence of poor policy, make a massive investigation into how the government conducted itself from contact tracing to supply chains to PPE to the vaccines, go through the whole gamut and demand a unified national strategy for the next pandemic. And if they can't come to one, then have the private industry create one and fund them for it. For about $20 billion, we can pre-make vaccines to the phase 2 clinical trial level for every single disease that could cause a pandemic. And within 4 months, we can have a vaccine in market. Had we had that proactively for coronavirus, we would have a vaccine in May. And if we could mass manufacture it, every American could have been vaccinated by the end of the year. And corona would be gone. We'd have maybe 50,000 people dead instead of 350,000 people. There are solutions to this. These solutions will not get implemented if we as the citizenry do nothing. We must demand it and hold people accountable. Some people need to go to jail. Some people need to have their reputations destroyed. Some people need to have their money taken away from them that they have through ill-gotten gains. I would love to see if there's insider trading with Novavax and Moderna in particular. Why did a company with 375 employees on the edge of bankruptcy that had never deployed a product to market since 1987 when they were founded somehow get a contract for 1.6 billion doses? When you look at all the different government contracts and billions of dollars of subsidies and funding through Operation Warp Speed. If you actually believe that that company was capable of doing that, there's too much risk in a small-scale organization being entrusted with that kind of capital. Why did the Defense Production Act not be used to take over the company and nationalize the vaccine and open source it? Why not? Same for Moderna. Never brought a product to market. Why not use the Defense Production Act to take them over? Why didn't that happen? Moncef Slaoui, the vaccine czar, used to be on the board of Moderna before he became the vaccine czar. I guarantee you, look at the stock price of Novavax and how it went way up. There's some sort of connection between the policymakers and that particular company. It sickens me. And that must be investigated. Absolutely must be investigated. And we must be relentless, as doggedly relentless as possible, because here's what's going to happen. 4 vaccines are going to be on market by February. They're all probably going to be above 90% effectiveness. By May, we'll have at least 5, just US. And then there's the global vaccines. Those 5 alone can vaccinate enough people that by June, this is no longer a pandemic for the United States. Okay, it's over. Social distancing is over. Mask wearing is over. Some states will have it because they have fucking control freak governors and so forth. And here's what the government's going to do. God, that was terrible. We're so glad we're through it. Okay, bye everybody. Everything's okay. And try to sweep it all under the rug and pretend like it never happened and business as usual and move on. It's only going to be a problem if we make it a problem. So in 2021, that's our duty as people to get involved. So get vaccinated. Yes, they're safe. And let's get out of the immediate crisis and end this before 1 million people die of it. And we have 5 million people with permanent disabilities. And then let's hold an inquisition and burn the people down who are responsible for getting it to a point that 1 million people died. Getting it to a point that millions of people have disabilities when other countries had 7 people die. Charles, are you sure that Codius is actually dead, or has it been in hiding? What would happen if it reemerged? Doesn't matter now. They lost it. It was a window of time. Ripple could have had smart contracts before Ethereum was even launched. They would have owned the entire DeFi movement and the ICO revolution. If you are another smart contract platform, why are you not Tron? What unique are you bringing to the table that's special and interesting and unique? There's nothing there anymore. So Codius's time has come and passed. You can launch Codius 2.0, makes your dick bigger and, cures your cancer. Doesn't matter. They've lost it. Which bands besides Pink Floyd do you admire the most? I really love Bob Dylan. He just wrote the best lyrics, especially 1960s, 1970s Bob Dylan. I saw him in concert. I went to Red Rocks, wonderful venue in Colorado outside of Morrison. And it's like built right into the mountains. And you have these wonderful open air amphitheater. And I was so excited. I had my Bob Dylan shirt on, and I go there, and I brought some friends who were like real Bob Dylan fans and so forth. And we had to wait for Bob Dylan to come. And of course, he's late because he's fucking Bob Dylan, right? You never expect that guy to be on time. And then I hear him sing. And first off, it sounds like he's been eating bowls of Brillo pads, washing it down with acid. His voice was just messed up and terrible. And I was, oh, God. Okay, well, I still can have the novelty of hearing Bob Dylan sing Hurricane and Tambourine Man and all these great songs. And he refused to sing any of them. Not a single fucking one. He sung all this new stuff, which was like Jimmy Buffett had sex with, I don't know, like pick your favorite bluegrass singer. And it was like Margaritaville bluegrass Bob Dylan. It was crazy. And half the audience left like within 45 minutes of the concert. It was so bad. And people were yelling like, along the watchtower. And he'd be like, fuck you. I'm just going to do my thing. Bob Dylan. So vintage Bob Dylan, great. Modern day Bob Dylan, we'll just pretend he doesn't exist. I love him. You know, another guy I loved, Jim Croce, and unfortunately he died, I think, in 1973 in a plane crash. But he did a lot of wonderful songs like Operator, but he also did Time in a Bottle. And everybody forgot about Jim Croce. And then X-Men did Days of Futures Past or something like that. And they had that lovely scene with the guy who could slow down time, or speed himself up, Quicksilver. It said, I could have time in a bottle. That was Jim Croce. And wonderful art. I really like Jim Croce. I also like John Denver as well. And, John also died in a plane crash as well. In fact, one of my best moments, I watched a YouTube video of John Denver and Johnny Cash together, and they were singing a duet for Rocky Mountain High. And Johnny Cash was another one. What was sad about Cash was that he got this great manager and producer to work with him right before he died. And he did all these amazing albums, and he did these amazing covers. Like he covered Marilyn Manson, Personal Jesus. He covered Trent Reznor, Hurt. In fact, the Hurt cover was so good that Reznor was like, I don't own the song anymore. It's like, people are going to think I covered Johnny Cash's song. I love Johnny Cash, both vintage Cash, like A Boy Named Sue. That's a great one. Boston is another band I really enjoy. In 1976, they were kind of a one-hit wonder, one album wonder. They came out with More Than a Feeling, and then Long Time. Incredible jam band. And I saw them in person at Fiddler's Green down in Arapahoe, in Centennial, here in Colorado a few years back. And it was a great concert. The Doobie Brothers opened for them. I really enjoyed it. Gotta love Journey as well. I saw Steve Miller and Journey years ago at the Pepsi Center. And then I liked Steve Miller so much when I had the IHK Summit in 2019. I called Steve Miller up and I was like, Steve, what are you doing? And he's like, well, nothing. I say, can you come to Miami and play at my conference? And he's like, well, pay me a lot of money, I'll do it. I said, well, okay. Say, well, I also talked to CCR a little earlier today, and Clear Arts Creed and Revival is going to, come and right. They can't be Revival anymore. They're Revisited. They're going to come and play for me. And Steve's like, well, I've never played with them before. Okay, maybe we can make that happen. So I got CCR and Steve Miller to come and play, and boy, that was a lot of fun. It was a little expensive for Steve because he charged me to fly all of his guitars out. And I thought for sure that wasn't going to be very expensive, but he flew 14 guitars to Miami, and that was fun. But God, it was a great concert. Hung out with him backstage and got to see him. And Steve's getting a little older, but I really enjoyed it. Been to Phoenix, Arizona, all the way to Dakota, Philadelphia, Atlanta, LA. And of course, you have Dan Larimer's favorite song, Take the Money and Run. But Steve did great work. And then CCR rocked it. Absolutely. They fucking Fortunate Son, Born in the Bayou. They were going all, and they just got some great people in that band. They got this kid from Sundance that's doing all the vocals, and God, he's good. So I really enjoyed CCR. It was just a great concert, private concert that we put on. The other band I really love is, as I mentioned, is Pink Floyd. But there's actually two cover bands for Pink Floyd that are incredible. There's the Pink Floyd Experience and there's Brit Floyd. I actually tried to get them to play, and they were both overbooked and super busy. But next time I do the IHK Summit, I'll see if I can get them to come and maybe get either Waters or Gilmore. Well, I'm a little upset at Waters because of that goddamn opera that he did. I went and saw it, and it was horrible. So maybe I'll get Gilmore to come and just have him play with like Brit Floyd, and I'll say, okay, it's Pink Floyd. Gilmore's here. It's Pink Floyd. It's okay. We're good. We're good. God, who else do I love with bands? I've met a lot of musicians. I really like Charlie Daniels as well. I was going to have him come play. It's really cheap to get you to play. I saw him at the Golden Nugget all the time. So I go to NFR every year, the National Finals Rodeo in December. It's the first week of December in Las Vegas. And Charlie Daniels almost always would be there in Frontier Days up in Wyoming. And so I just go and see Charlie Daniels play. You can get great tickets for like $40. You sit in the front row seat. He had this 80-year-old guy come out there and just fucking jam for 2 hours. And you say, where does he find the energy? This is absolutely remarkable. And unfortunately, Charlie Daniels died this year, and I was really sad about that because he was a hell of a guy. He played with Elvis, he played with Johnny Cash, he played with Bob Dylan. He was in that Tennessee music circle right in the 1960s where like everybody knew each other and they all played with each other. And his claim to fame, a lot of you guys probably heard "The Devil Went Down to Georgia," and that's just a great song. He's just fiddling it up and everything. It's lots of parodies behind it. I can't stand any of the new pop stars. I've had some hearing loss over the years, and the auto-tune new pop stars, I can't even really fully grok the lyrics in a lot of cases. So I guess I've become an old man. And also, there's just no musical talent there. It's just a manufactured in a laboratory, and they run them for a few years and then replace them with another model and replace them with another model. Exit Katy Perry, come in this model, and it's bereft of anything. I think Lady Gaga is incredibly talented, though. She's like a spiritual successor to Cher and Madonna, and she kind of did her own thing. And she has a lot of natural music talent, and was trained properly and has the right pedigree and so forth. And I'm a little biased because we have the same Lamborghini, although mine's a Spider. Same color, though. So yeah, Gaga is interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of bands out there. A lot of classical musicians that are tremendously talented as well, like Valentina Lisitsia. She's a Ukrainian pianist and probably the best pianist alive right now. Absolutely just remarkable. And she did something that few pianists can do. She played everything that Beethoven ever wrote, and also the same for Chopin, and played it probably better than Beethoven played it. She's like Franz Liszt with a feminine twist. So there's some great pianists there. And one of the joys I had when the world was open is that I'd always try to catch an opera or a symphony, and especially all the European travel. It was very easy to go see the Berlin Philharmonic or the Vienna Orchestra, or go to the Zurich Opera House and see a nice performance or something like that. It's just like it's a nice evening, and I really enjoy doing those things. So I'm very eclectic and diversified musical taste. A lot of really cool music happening in Africa. I was in Rwanda. I just met with President Kagame, and I was in Kigali, and they said, you have to go to this after party for this Africa Transform Summit. I said, sure. And so I show up, and they had all these young, like, techno, rap, classical, cello, traditional African artists that were there just doing stuff. And I was like, whoa, what is this? I don't know what's going on, but it's amazing. I'm both confused and aroused at the same time. It's strange and magical. So there's some really cool stuff going on there in the Rwandan music scene and the Ugandan music scene. You gotta give credit where credit's due. Okay, I think I've lost everybody with my my musical ramble. And I got to get out of here at some point. It's been going on for 3 hours. I've lived a hell of a life. And one of these days I'll have to write a book about it. I've been to 52 countries. I've met tons of heads of state, world leaders, Fortune 500 CEOs, a lot of musicians, a lot of creative people. And I've really enjoyed all of my time. And it's just getting started. It's just getting better, I met Elon Musk before he was cool. I went to CU Boulder, and he used to fly there all the time because his brother is based in Boulder, Kimball. He runs a little restaurant there called The Kitchen. He still fucking cooks. He's a billionaire. It's crazy. And he'd go to CU Boulder recruit because you have all these brilliant aerospace engineers, and they'd just be like, we're not worthy. So they would go and apply to work for Elon. And he'd be like, yeah, you can work at SpaceX, but I'm going to pay you like $20,000 a year. And they get a job at Boeing for like $200,000. They're like, whatever you say, great Elon, we shall work for you. So that was a lot of fun. It was a lot smaller back in the day. He was like known in the circles, but nobody in the world kind of really knew Elon too well. And so you could walk up to him and be like, Mr. Musk, can I take your picture? He'd be like, all right, sure. I'm sure that doesn't happen much anymore. Talking heads, yes. That's another great band. And Queen, we cannot forget Queen. That's another great band as well. Do you and he get along, Elon Musk and I? I don't think he remembers my name or much about me. Met him a few times. I've met his brother a few times. His brother probably served me dinner at some point throughout my life at the kitchen. No, I'm very small fish compared to a big guy like Elon. And, there's a great legacy there. So Elon Musk only met Steve Jobs once. It was at a party in Silicon Valley, and Jobs didn't think very much of Elon Musk. So there's a passing of the baton there. So I've only really met Elon Musk one really significant time, and I'm sure he didn't think too much of me. So there's a passing of the baton. So hopefully I've been anointed to be the next Elon Musk, if that transitivity holds from Jobs to Musk to Charles. But that's probably ego talking. The Berlin Philharmonic is a great place. You can hear someone fart across the room. The last time I heard them play, I went to Berlin and heard them do Beethoven's Ninth Symphony at the Brandenburg Gate. I showed up a little late. There was already too many people there. They had closed the entrance, so I snuck in to the conference. I found a hole in the gate, and I kind of crawled through it, and I got in, and I managed to sneak my way as close to the front as possible. But I may have done some things that were slightly illegal to do that, but I saw them play, and God, it was amazing. I took some videos. One of these days, I'll share it with you guys over Twitter. You guys are getting all the inside information. We got to get all of 2020 out. Just got to get 2020 out. It's done. 2021 is going to be amazing. 2020 was horrible. So we're just all commiserating on our shared misery. Elon Musk is truly a great African American. Technically true. He was born in South Africa. He is the richest African American in the world. Thoughts on simulation theory? I don't have time because I don't want to keep going to talk about that today, but I promise you I will do a monologue on Bostrom and simulation hypothesis and the philosophy behind it and so forth. So the next time, guys, next year, we'll talk about it. Hyperbaric update. We are buying the hyperbaric chamber. My secretary, Michael Lagaduta, he's been doing extensive research, and we're trying to figure it out because the garage that we're putting it in is also going to have an ice chamber, and it's going to have a flotation tank. So in the same room, I'll have a shower, a flotation tank, so an isolation tank, an ice bath that I can get in and do Wim Hof training, and a hyperbaric chamber. How about that? And we have to get the heating and cooling and all this other stuff done. And also we have to insulate it and temperature control the room. Plus we have to sound dampen the room. So I am definitely doing the hyperbaric chamber to follow the Jerusalem protocol that was recommended, 90 minutes, 5 times a day, 5 times a week, excuse me. So what I'm probably going to do is take my daily reading that I do and just read in the hyperbaric chamber and follow the protocol. Now, if we do this, I'll do methylation tests for you guys, and I'll do a before and after. I talked to one of our ADA fans, Dr. Lesser. He's based out of Florida, brilliant guy. And we'll probably rig something up where we can test my biological age before and after and see if the hyperbaric chamber did anything for me. Hypothetically, increases your telomere length by up to 35%, which is incredible. And I think it really has some great regenerative effects. So we'll find out. You left Ethereum. Can you say something to the Cardano community that you won't leave Cardano either, just to increase confidence for the Cardano community? Well, Mr. Singh, I was at Ethereum from December of 2013 to June of 2014. My leaving of that was mutual. I didn't want to stay, and they didn't want me to stay, and we didn't agree on philosophy or strategy. I felt for sure they were going to go bankrupt and the project was going to fail, and the people who bought in the ICO were probably going to class action lawsuit them. There was no reason to stay. We got very lucky. They raised 18 million, only 500,000 was left before Ethereum hit market. And if the market moved in a different direction, no one would talk about Ethereum. There definitely would have been a legal event, most likely a lawsuit at the end of all of it, because the funds were not spent in the cleanest and bestest of ways. Okay, that's just a fact, whether they want to admit it or not. And Laura Shin and the others will dig all of that out in their books and make plenty of money reminding the world that it was not the prettiest of launches. Cardano, I've been at now for almost 6 years, working tirelessly on that, which is 12 times longer than Ethereum. So if that's not an indication of my passion and resolve for this project, the fact that we're just kind of scaling up, I don't know how else I can convince you. So you have to just look at facts and patterns. I've been working on Cardano since 2015, and it's the most meaningful product and project of my life. And the whole point of building Cardano was that I could use Cardano to then go do things in Africa for billions of people. Not just in Africa, but across the world, those who don't have economic identity. So it's in my best interest for that platform to be useful for as many people as possible, which portends sticking around for a long time. That's what I wanted to do with Ethereum. We were talking about Hollands in the developing world. I cared a lot about that. When I left, they started talking to JP Morgan. They started doing a lot of Fortune 500 stuff. They did a lot in Europe and a lot in America, and great for them. And they certainly have a great market cap, but not a lot of Ethereum in the unbanked world. So let's go do that. Michael Saylor, yeah, he's a crypto guy, rocket scientist, created a great educational initiative, Saylor University. You know, standard big scale investor like a Tim Draper, just a little smarter. And it's good to see him in the crypto space. What is the cost of a hyperbaric chamber? They run them anywhere from 10 grand to 50 grand. It just depends on the bells and whistles and the supporting infrastructure around it. I'm a little worried about safety. I want to be able to operate it myself without problems. And so there's a long history of new age entrepreneurs who've killed themselves with their experiments that they've conducted. So I don't want to be another one of those numbers. So everything I do is very safe. Like, I get the isolation tank. I use them all the time. That makes sense. COVID stopped that. I couldn't use the places that I use. That's why I'm buying one. And ice bath, I kind of get that too. I know how to treat hypothermia. I think I'll be okay. A little concerned about hyperbaric. Never done anything there yet. Also doing a lot of biofeedback work. Just bought a Mendy. We'll see what that does. Don't you need a toilet break soon? I have taught before, sir. You develop an iron bladder once you lecture. Peter Schiff. I've met Peter Schiff many times throughout the years, most recently in 2017 at the Aspen Institute. Peter's Peter. We call him Dr. Doom. The economy is always collapsing. Gold is always king. Euro-Pacific capital has the one truth. And now Bitcoin is the enemy. Why? Because it's the single greatest threat to gold investment. The set of people buying gold is diminishing every year and transferring over to crypto. And that's a huge threat to Peter. And Peter is ill-equipped to be able to play in our space. So He's doing what everybody does who's protecting his turf. Bitcoin's a scam. Rah, rah, rah. He said the same thing to me in 2017 and to Eric Voorhees and the rest of the gang. And we keep telling him, Eric, no. And he's like, no, it's all going to collapse. There's no value, whatever. Peter's Peter. He's an artifact. There are a lot of people in those Mises, Austrian economics side that, some are very good. Like I like Tom Woods. Tom is a good guy. Makes me laugh. Slip note. The slip box method. Iron Bladder is my new death metal band. I have a story about this. So Carlo Vicari used to work for me years ago, back when we first came into ETC. And we were in Malta together. And Carlo's like, Charles, dolphins rape people. And I was like, Carlos, Carlo, that's made up. He's like, no. They have these rape coves. They'll actually like grab a person and take them into a cove and rape them. And I looked at Carlo and I was like, you're telling me there are dolphin rape coves? He's like, yeah. And then we had this awkward silence for a little bit. And I looked at him and I said, that's perhaps the best death metal band name I've ever heard in my life. Dolphin Rape Cove. So, guys, it's open. Somebody's going to take it and be the next Metallica. It's going to be great. Favorite board game. Is chess considered a board game? Can I get away with that? I don't want to be like one of those fucking hipsters and have to be like Settlers of Catan. Urgh. By the way, I never confirmed if dolphins actually do that. So I do not want to impugn the character of dolphins everywhere. They save people from sharks. They have really cool sonar. Apparently the Navy trained them to like blow up ships or save ships from being blown up. I can't remember. There was some sort of dolphin Navy connection. So I don't want to impugn the dolphins, and I feel bad about them being caught in tuna nets. I'm just saying I heard from reliable people that there are dolphin rape coves, whether it's true or not. So I'm going to have all these like dolphin loving people in the comment section. How dare you? Flipper was magical. What was that? SeaWorld, Ocean World, where they had the intelligent dolphin that talked. Chess is a board game. I'm going to go with it. Have you ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender? Yes, I watched the animated show, and I saw the M. Night Shyamalan movie, and then I spent a long time trying to forget that I watched the M. Night Shyamalan movie. And the twist is it's a movie. Have you tried long-term fasting? Yeah, the longest fast I've ever done is I went 2 weeks of not eating. Just water, 2 weeks long. Have you read Paul Stamets? Oh, I absolutely do. I have 2 of his books right over there. And he's a good mycologist. There are other people that are of equal prominence, perhaps better, but interesting guy, and very evangelistic about mushrooms. Love his little mushroom cap. And he's certainly done a lot for getting people to be aware of the power of mushrooms. What's your favorite movie? Probably the best movie overall as a movie. Like, check every box, was There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis. Not always the most entertaining movie or fun to watch, but just constructed as a movie, in every part from cinematography to dialogue and so forth. My favorite movie probably is Blade Runner 2049. Love Danny Villeneuve. There's so much depth in that movie, and it's magical. And it was stayed true to form, where the Blade Runner was not commercially successful. Oh, Pulp Fiction, yes. How the fuck can we forget that? Yeah, it was a great movie as well. Just out there. Are you still staking if you delete the wallet? Yeah, because your wallet deletion is a local event, and the staking has to be changed by a transaction on the blockchain. The Big Lebowski, amazing movie as well. Jeff Bridges unfortunately has cancer. I hope he survives. I actually wanted him to become to be the master of ceremonies for the IHK Summit. We're going to do a whole dude thing, and then William Shatner. We talked to him. Unfortunately, he couldn't do it because there was a schedule conflict. Then we talked to Steve Wozniak. He had just had hip surgery, so he couldn't do it. So we went with someone else to be the MC. But Jeff Bridges was my first choice. Danny Villeneuve says that Dune is the best movie he's ever made. I'd certainly fucking hope so. He's been wanting to make Dune for 20 years. And oh my God, every movie he's made is like an audition to do that. So Dune better be good. It better be so amazing. Like world changing, amazing, or else I'll hate him for the rest of my life. What was in the briefcase? It's an allegory for desire. What do you think about blockchain that is used to verify donations to charities and verify charity transactions so they know the exact amount going to the cause? Great idea. I'd love to see something proposed in the DC fund specifically for that, especially for faith-based organizations. So much money goes out and you don't get a proper accountability for it. Debbie Does Dallas. You also have the popsicle stick Debbie Does Dallas robot chicken parody. How about that? Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think that was coming, did you? But it did. Favorite Rachmaninoff piece? Come on now. The third piano concerto. Absolutely extraordinary. Valentina Lisizia. Have her play it. She's the best. He made a lot of great preludes as well. I played some of them actually back when I used to play the piano. Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's last movie. It came out in 1999. It's a great movie. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. DMT stories. Well, if I had any, I would have to save those for Joe Rogan, guys. Rogan after Gogan. What's your favorite Spice Girl? You see, I'm too young for the Spice Girls to have been prominent for me. You have to ask me, what is my favorite My Little Pony? Because I'm right in the age group for that. See, Todd, you gotta know your audience. You gotta know that. Come on, Todd. Spice Girls were huge in elementary school. Why? I didn't go to elementary school. I was homeschooled. So yeah, how about that? That's why I graduated at 15. Very fucking awkward going to college as a 15-year-old. Don't do that. Who's the most powerful man in crypto? Soon to be Janet Yellen. She has within her power to make Bitcoin $250,000 or $5,000 or somewhere in between. There is no person more powerful than that. I'm not going to answer that one yet. I'm looking for this one right here. It just came in. From Tio. Hi, Charles. I'm still waiting on you to drive your supercar on the racetrack in Vegas. I've been looking at the new McLarens, the 720s. Do you guys have any of those in stock? The other thing is, we're in a weird supercar reality right now where they're all going battery, and the battery-powered ones are like 1,200, 1,500 horsepower, and they're insane. Like the new Roadster, for example, it's like 1,200 horsepower. 0 to 60 in 1.8 seconds. It's insane, absolutely insane. So yeah, I would only take the time to go to the track and drive something if you guys have the new stock, like a Porsche 918 with the hybrid train, or a McLaren 720S. Why Janet Yellen? Because she controls U.S. policy on cryptocurrencies, and she can decide to be thumbs down or thumbs up or somewhere in between. And based upon those decisions, we'll see hundreds of billions of dollars of institutional money enter the cryptocurrency space or not. So she's very powerful in that respect. We do, but don't drive a McLaren. They're terrible. They break after 2 times. My oil pump went out in the Lamborghini at 12,000 miles. It cost $8,000 to fix it. Don't tell me about breaking cars, you bastard. The Italians, we make it a good car. Una macchina, kind of like a bicicletta, kind of, no, cozy. But you gotta love it. I actually got that because I worked for Polymath. I did Polymesh, and they paid me a consultancy, and I said, well, I'll get a Lamborghini with it. It was my one superfluous expense. I drive nothing but Cadillacs and trucks. And I said, well, I've always wanted to have one of these. And so I was in a position where I had these tokens, these other things. And I said, fuck it, let's do it. So you can thank Polly for the Lamby. Non parlo l'italiano. Mi piace l'Italia. Mi amo. Che bello. Favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger film? Oh my God, that is the hardest question I think anybody's ever asked me. I think probably Predator was the most complete of all the Schwarzenegger films. It's standalone. It's just fucking timeless. You can watch it today. It's just as good as the day it came out. I mean, everybody says Terminator 2 was like the high point. And there's a lot of great stuff in his career, but that or Total Recall were both great. See you at the party house. He throws the arms. Oh my God. Oh, that was so good. What was the first car you ever owned? Dirt poor. I had a Ford Taurus. Old clunky Taurus. LP610 Spider. Oh, this guy. No, I've seen this guy. He's like all over the comments section. He's all over Twitter. Besides being like part of the paint chip brigade, he can't even get his lies right. We did a public disclosure about how much ADA we hold. It's 2.4 billion. He claims there's 5 billion. And we received that ADA as compensation as part of the development contract to build Cardano. The valuation of the ADA at the time it was given was $6 million. Very small amount relative to a 5-year development agreement for a large team, in addition to the Bitcoin fiat received. But this guy keeps going every channel, every time, says the same lie, says the same lie, says the same lie, and so forth. I think it was the person that reached out to me over Telegram and told me I needed to burn, for some reason, all of the ADA that my organization holds because it's not fair. I told him he was an idiot and then banned him, blocked him on Telegram. And then after that moment, every single AMA and YouTube video I make, he comments on it and also goes to Twitter and CCs the SEC and posts screen captures of me calling him an idiot for telling me to destroy my own money of my company that was earned for commercial services performed. This is an example of a bad person, just a bad person, a misguided, stupid, bad person who holds a grudge and vendetta because he didn't get his way. And that's what they do. I'm a bad guy because I'm successful. Dude, I've been in Bitcoin for a very long time. I've been in the crypto space for a very long time. The 3 projects, BitShares, Ethereum, Cardano, that I created collectively hold a market value above $80 billion. And that's just the projects I created, not the work I did in Bitcoin, or the Bitcoin I received back when a Bitcoin was $1. Think for your fucking self. I'm a successful entrepreneur, and I've been in a very successful industry, the most successful industry in the last 10 years in human history. And that's called being successful. You're not. You're a fucking loser who just shows up and just rants again and again and again and again and again, trying to piggyback on other people's success. And I really don't appreciate the things that you do. This is my I opened up the AMA. It's a good way to bookend what we're talking about. It's the longest AMA I've ever done. Fitting way to end 2020. I talked about empathy, understanding people, knowing their motivation, where they come from, what they do. And actions speak far louder than words. Everybody can tell you how honest they are, how great they are, how big their dick is. But at the end of the day, I follow the Paul Halmos way of doing things. Paul Halmos was a famous mathematician, and he was a great mathematician, but he was a better writer. And he followed something called the inductive writing method. So he'd write the first chapter, then he'd write the second chapter, go back and rewrite the first chapter. Then he'd write the third chapter and then go back and rewrite the first and second chapter, and so forth. So it took him a really long time to write a book. They'd all be very small. The first chapter would be fucking phenomenal. Last chapter would be incomprehensible. But he had this great method. He said, tell him what you're going to do it, and tell him what you did. That's math. And Halmos was just a genius in that respect, this great Hungarian mathematician. I really admired him. I never had a real chance to meet him. He died a little bit earlier, before I had a chance to get too big into math. And I always wanted to, because I so admired the way he wrote and thought. And so when we look at cryptocurrencies, it's like, tell them what you're going to do. We're going to build Cardano. Okay. So some people took the risk, and we went and did it. A lot of people, actually. 9,914 in Japan, Korea, and other places in Asia, and 3 core entities that worked really hard. And then we did it. We built Cardano, and we released it in September of 2017. And then we kept working on it. Hundreds of updates throughout the last 4 years. And we got it to a point where 1,200 stateful operators are here, million lines of code, 91 academic papers, hundreds of thousands of community members, listed on 30 plus exchanges. There's tons of success there, and a beautiful roadmap for how that we can match or exceed every single cryptocurrency in market. We know how to do it, and it's a inevitability in terms of capabilities. And we did this in a very uncertain environment. We did this in an environment with a million problems. We had issues with the Cardano Foundation, with Michael Parsons. We had product managers that didn't work out, project managers that didn't work out. We chose the worst language you could choose to build this thing in, Haskell. We somehow survived. We had to build up the language itself. And then the Haskell community, some members of it attacked us for bizarre reasons, like, oh, crypto is using Haskell for reputation laundering. Let's write blog posts about it. Meanwhile, we're investing millions of dollars to make Haskell work on WebAssembly and JavaScript and funding the Haskell Foundation and other such things. It's been a hell of a journey, and we did it. We got it over the line. This was our year. Shelley shipped. No one thought it was going to. It did. It was the hardest single launch in the history of our industry. We went from a static and federated system to a dynamic and decentralized system. And now we're in the tell them what you did phase, because there's a gap between what's actually in market and what people perceive to be in market. So we have to spend a big chunk of 2021 just telling people about what Cardano is, because it's a Leviathan. It was built to last. And that was 5 years of my life, the hardest 5 years I've ever had in my life. And I didn't have to spend these years this way. I could have just rested on my laurels and I could have easily just gone off to the mountaintop and not really worked. So I'd already reached enough success by the time I had launched Cardano that life was going to be pretty easy for me no matter what. I chose to spend half a decade of running around the world, going to 52 countries, running a company, building all of this, because I legitimately felt that the things that we were building could make a difference in the world. And what happens is that when you do these things, it creates a beacon for some people to just go out there and beat the hell out of you. And it used to bother me. It really did. It used to just eat the fuck away from me. And I'd just be like, God, who are these people? But now it makes me sad. I just feel pity, because I think, God, this person lives in a world that's so small that no matter how much evidence you give them or what you show them or what you've accomplished, what you've built, what you can do with what you've built, they still believe what they believe. And it's just like dealing with a flat earther. It's like dealing with somebody who thinks the earth is 6,000 years old. You just can't convince those people. You can't get them over the line. You really just can't push them in that direction. And you feel so much pity, because at the end of the day, their lives are terrible because of that perspective. They never achieve great success. They never get respect from their peers. They never get a good life, which is why they got the chip on their shoulder and the victim complex and the anger. They feel like they've gotten a bad shake and they feel like the world's against them, but they don't have the emotional intelligence or skills to admit the reason why they didn't get a fair shake is because they burnt themselves to the ground. It's like seeing an addict or an alcoholic who can't admit that they're an alcoholic, or any of these people laden with problems, and they can't admit that they have problems. So that's, I guess, the bookend of all of it. It's in a year in closing 2020, it's been a very hard year for all of us. And what taught me, especially watching all the tragedy, like I remember when the markets completely collapsed and there was blood in the streets and everybody was panicking. And I went out there and I said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I quoted FDR, I think, in that video. It's in my office, and I didn't have a single concern. I said, you know what? We've been through this before. We will recover. We will prevail. We will get through all of it. And sure enough, we did. The world got better. Things got better. Hope came. It's clear that this is ephemeral. Most tragedies are. But what it did lead me is that we need to be more empathetic. We need to care about each other more. We need to understand other people's perspectives. I honestly do try to understand these critics' perspectives. Like, I get Max Kaiser and Tone Vase because I know what makes them money. They do and say the things that they do and say because that's their business model. It's the same for Chico Crypto. That's his business model. And he scaled it down a little bit because of litigation, but at the end of the day, it's still his business model, and that's how he exists. That's what he does. And that's how he gets clicks. Okay. So I understand that, and I don't take it personally. What makes me profoundly sad is when people have these perspectives that hurt themselves or hurt others, and there's no reason to have that perspective, and it's impossible to convince them otherwise. That person who posted that, I am sure in his mind, 100% believes I'm a con man and scammer who's trying to hurt people in this industry. And that Cardano is not real, it has no real value, and it's a bad thing for everybody. You can spend the next 10 years putting paper, putting progress, putting partnerships and things in front of that person, and he'll set it on fire because there's nothing that you can show him to convince him otherwise. That's just who he is. It's his perspective on life. It's the same with the anti-vaxxers or these other people. They just think they're right. And you just can't have a conversation. You can't connect because they've defeated themselves. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, that we have to overcome in the coming years. That empathy gap and the inability for us to have conversations anymore. It's getting much, 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 much worse. Now there are so many people on the political spectrum, the religious spectrum, the scientific or anti-science spectrum, the crypto spectrum, who are incapable of evolving and growing and listening and learning and being able to adapt and change to new ideas. It's impossible. Donald Trump lost the election, guys. It happened. You might believe it's because of fraud or not fraud. Who knows? But he lost. And Joe Biden will be president of the United States. This should not be a controversial statement. Just should not. It's a reality. It's a fact. We live in it. And in 20 days' time, it will be validated. Every single time I've mentioned this in a video, I've had people sincerely post comments saying, you are wrong. Just you wait and see. Biden will never be president. And they believe it. They would literally give all their money, put it on black. They'd bet on it because they believe it with that much sincerity. And then when it happens, not happens on the 20th, and Biden's president, he's being sworn in, it's going to be like this catastrophic cognitive dissonance. And then they'll have to construct some elaborate mental construction. The Catholic Church actually ran into this. When Pope Benedict stepped down, the fundamentalist Catholics in the Catholic Church said a pope cannot resign. So when Pope Francis came in, they said he is the illegitimate pope. Only Pope Benedict is legitimate until he dies. Francis cannot be pope. You can't say anything to convince them otherwise. Even Benedict, the pope, who's infallible, says, I am no longer the pope. He is the pope. I am the Pope Emeritus. They still believe Benedict is the pope, these fundamentalist people, Catholic Church. And same thing will happen here. So I don't know how to solve that. And all I know is there's an empathy gap, and people have a lack of understanding and lack of appreciation for evidence. And that's going to be the great challenge of my generation and our time, is how do we as a society overcome it? Because it is getting worse. The divisions are getting worse. People are starting to hate each other. People are starting to excommunicate each other. I have a cousin who married, or I guess is in a serious relationship with a gender studies PhD. And she's just off her rocker. And apparently she's made a mandate that he's not allowed to see my uncle and aunt, his family. They're super tight, his family and him. And he can't see his family because she says she doesn't feel safe around them because they don't accept her for her lifestyle or studies or whatever the hell it is. I just can't imagine that, having this bizarro perspective on things where because people disagree with your field of study or the things that you do, you have to take it to a level where you tell a person's son, you can no longer see your father or mother or other family members for the rest of your life. And that's happening. It's now happened to my extended family. It's happened to a lot of other families. This woke cult is destroying people. And if you try to go and reason with this person and say, do you think that's appropriate? You talk about harm and microaggressions and psychological trauma. What type of psychological trauma are you inflicting on him by denying him his family that he's loved for 30 plus years? Over the head. It's the world we live in. And that is the great challenge of our time, is how do we overcome that? How do we bridge those gaps? How do we get people to understand each other? I have strong disagreements with EOS and Tezos. I've been very vocal about that, as I do Vitalik and these other guys. But you know what? I don't delight in their suffering. And I applaud them when they do great things. For example, when Ethereum 2 launched, I said, congratulations, Vitalik. That's the world we should live in. That's the world I'd like to live in. And let's make 2021 the world that makes that happen. All right, everybody. It's the longest AMA I've ever done. Almost 4 hours straight of me talking. How about that? I went from like 8 p.m. to 12 p.m. I went to midnight. Pretty crazy. Happy New Year. Let's all have a much better year than the year that came before. Cheers.